Did you appease your Twitter Heather to cozy movie? Cozy.
Be cozy, yeah.
No.
Sure. It's okay, I made coffee and then walked out the door. Yeah.
Oh, you messed up, Cindy.
We'll go out there.
Indeed.
I just filled yesterday for my coffee this morning, but I had that fast blood draw, so.
Oh, no. You can't drink coffee before that?
What else?
You responded
Okay.
earlier,
No,
which is
the
probably a
chance
good
of
thing.
doing
My response was gonna be, you know, like everyone else,
it
you're
changes
leasing
your
from
blood
us, your
sugar a
problem is
little.
maintenance.
Probably everything.
Go for it.
Yeah.
But that's cruel.
Agreed.
Do it himself.
Jay,
Cindy? Good. We're good now.
I've been practicing.
Check, check.
I was so tired the other day.
Signage, I got signage, they have signage hanging on trees.
Oh. He's gonna push me hard enough, well.
I know
Say,
he
you know
is.
what, you're right, this is just too much liability here, John, so we're gonna need to cancel this lease, we'll give you your money back. We'll just call it a day, close the rent until we can get the money to repair it.
I mean, it is constant.
Play games with him much.
No, what's the protocol as a budget session? I'm happy to let you
Open up the
run
meeting.
things.
Okay.
Let's open up the meeting.
Okay, we're
Jody
just-
takes it from there.
We're going to start with the harbor today. And does everyone have a packet? There's more by the door. Okay. Okay, so we'll just start with the revenues.
Before we get into that, and I'll ask two general questions, so I don't have to ask everybody. One of them is across the board, there's an increase in benefits, about what, 8% for almost every department. What does that mean?
Because we won't get our benefit numbers until about halfway through the budget approval process, meaning we don't know what our rates are gonna be. We factor in a 15% increase in health insurance into this. So when you factor that into it, and then we are assuming, and that's a huge issue, that with the upcoming labor contract, we'll be moving all the PMEA employees to an 80-20 ratio, meaning the borough pays 80%, employees pay 20%. It's still kind of below our competitors, but we can't, like the hospital, I think pays 85% here. Sitka was at 90%, Wrangell's up around that same area. So all of that added up gets you that increase in benefits. In reality, we don't know what that number is until we get the rates back from the insurance carrier, which will be, Kathy's not here, usually about mid-May. So right about the time you're in the second reading of the budget is when we'll actually update this and have hardcore numbers. Numbers could go up or down.
And we won't know about the 80-20 until PME approves that.
yeah.
So we're just assuming. Because right now we pay 100% of the employee and 50% of the dependents. So this would be 80%. So if the borough was just covering you, you're not gonna, the PMEA member is not going to like this plan. But if you're covering a whole family,
You're gonna like
it's
it.
gonna save you a lot of money. So
So that's so built into that. Those benefit numbers are, hate to use the word guesses, but they're.
That's what it is.
It really is what it is. I mean, I could call it anything else.
My second question then is just a general question. Your formula to depreciation, to put the money aside and so forth, can you just give us give me an overview of which ones met it, which didn't?
And that's only for enterprise funds.
Right.
So then I'll.
For all enterprise funds, the only one that met it was wastewater.
Okay.
But where I'm still working with Sheila on the Mountain View Manor because she had put a lot of capital outlays into her operating expenses, and so we're pulling those out right now. So she might have met it in one enterprise fund.
Okay.
And I hope to schedule before we leave today, if we could figure out a time that we could meet for the rest of the enterprise funds next week sometime, whatever works for you guys. So yeah, it would be water, wastewater, sanitation. We'll do motor pool, and then
And that's everything.
so for the harbor, and just interrupt me if you have questions.
Actually,
And-
it should be noted that Donnie loses $500,000 for being a couple minutes late.
I apologize about that. I was giving tours to the new
I'm
two
sorry, Donnie, my bad.
superintendents.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Yes, we have that scheduled today.
got
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Just one more thing.
So for the harbor revenues, there isn't an increased plan for mortgage rates or anything, so you'll notice it stays flat. If you move down, and I'm gonna point out mainly just significant changes, and so stop me if you have a question somewhere else. Fish tax, we're assuming that we're gonna get $800,000 in fish tax. The general fund's gonna keep 300, and then the remaining is gonna be transferred to the harbor. I think we'll probably get a lot more than 800,000, because last year we got over $1 million. So I'm guessing it might be,
Yeah.
well, I'm not gonna
This
guess,
year,
but-
yeah, the year before we got over $1 million.
Right.
Last
right.
year we didn't.
So it should be a bigger number than that, but,
Is the
so that's
ratio
the
gonna
other
stay
part.
the same for the split, or is it just 300 and anything over that'll go to the harbor?
Anything over 300 will go to the harbor.
Okay,
At this point,
Right.
that's an assembly decision.
all right, so that's what you're projecting now.
One of the things we were doing is going through the borough formation was trying to respond to the Harbor Advisory Board in the sense of finding ways for the harbor to have more money put aside for future projects. So we've been ratcheting down the general fund portion that we keep for the harbor fund by, what, 50,000 a year?
Yeah, this year we're keeping 350, and anything above that.
So this budget calls for us, general fund just keeping 300, and that other 50 plus going to the harbor. So again, that's what we're currently operating under, is just this steady ratcheting down of the raw fish tax that the general fund keeps. But that's an assembly level call.
And moving down to operating expenses, their payroll went up a little bit. Some of that is their security officer 1 moved to a 2 for your seasonal or part-time person in the budget, so that was, I think, $7,000 of that increase. We decided to start splitting out the DC lobbyists before it was just combined into professional services. But, so the harbor pays for a quarter of, the federal lobbyist, the electric fund pays for a quarter, and then the general fund pays for half of the federal lobbyist. And the general fund pays the entire amount for the state lobbyist. On the next page, she did budget $20,000 in contingency, which is different. She always has miscellaneous projects, and you can jump in. Doc, you like you're not here, but you're here.
Yeah.
Just miscellaneous projects that aren't in her budget that, you know, sometimes it's tough, or you don't have time to go to supplemental if something breaks down at the last minute. And so that's what that's for. It's right above total operating expenses, right before depreciation there.
Okay, contingency?
Like, you know, and Glow's doing this, and I've tried to encourage, you know, all of our departments to do that if they have the ability to do it, because, you know,
Well, the
you don't
ramp
know what'll break.
resurfacing.
It's really hard to forecast, you know, and then we end up putting money into specific categories to try to account for that, and then it's just guesswork, and then of course what breaks happens to be in a different category, and then we're coming back to the assembly for going through the whole supplemental process. So it's a way to try to account for that. We're doing a bit of forecasting here as far as what might break.
Roger.
Why such a big difference in the credit card fee? 1213 was half of what we're saying it is gonna be now.
Our actuals are a little higher this year.
This year.
There's more people using credit cards,
That's a lot, that's a big change.
and there's a lot of pay in advance for a year,
Okay.
more people.
Harbor gives a 10% discount if you pay your mortgage in advance. So I think we're seeing more and more people taking advantage of that and paying with a credit card. And there's a fee associated with that.
if we should give them a 5% discount. That seems like quite a bit.
It's a double-edged sword, you know, what you end up having to do, it's really nice to have that money in the pot. What ends up happening is then you spend a lot of time in collections trying to get, you know, so those credit cards are really handy.
Sure.
We are seeing so much more people paying before they leave, people paying right then, rather than us billing them 3-4 months, and then you
Chasing
end
down
up
money.
chasing down money. So,
But
you
the-
know,
but
it's
I-
a cost
I mean,
of
the
doing
corollary
business.
to that is your bad debt expense hasn't changed.
No. Mm-mm. Well, and to look at the credit card itself, the actual versus, you know, what we're trying to forecast, it's kind of a shot in the dark, you know. So.
Moving down, state PERS relief. Now you're going to see this in all of the budgets. There's an expense for $49,000. If you go back to the first page, there's also a revenue of $49,000. Now, we have to budget for this, even though this is the amount the state pays directly to our unfunded PERS liability, and they pay it directly to PERS, and it doesn't even go through us before we pay it. But the auditors want us to budget for it anyway, so we recognize that the state is doing this for us. So you're going to see this in every budget. So that's what that is.
Probably a good time to, if you haven't seen some of the emails, the state's considering different actions on PERS. One of them is a 2% increase to what the borough pays. It has nothing to do with this 49,000. That would be in addition to, you know, our benefit costs, or excuse me, salary costs. So, I mean, overall, I think, what was it, 98,000 to all borough funds if that goes through.
So if the state pays the unfunded, the 22, whatever the.
That's 30. That's supposedly 39
This
cents.
won't come back as over, as 49,000 that we can use for contingency. So this is going, okay.
That money is not really
Comes
there.
in,
You
goes
can,
out.
it's silly in my opinion, but that's
No,
what the
yeah, the
auditors
only
want.
way I know what amount it is they send me a piece of paper every month that says, this is how much we contributed for you. So moving down to capital outlays, security cameras, ramp improvements, computer, oh, go ahead.
Could we have, starting with the troller fleet and your expenditures, what's are all those outlays for?
Those are grants we
Right,
received.
but just so I understand what it is.
Which one are you?
Well, I'm looking from the troller float on down. That's
On
to
down.
replace one or to put one in?
We are working with ATA. We got a grant for $46,000 to build a troller work float that we are putting off the end of the skiff float. So we got money through on the incoming side from this grant, and this is. This grant actually goes until the completion date is July 31st, so we have to include it in this year's budget as well as the present year's budget. So Jody just wanted to have a little placeholder there and make sense. And then same thing with the fish cleaning station. We actually got an extension on that because it's a little bigger project. They gave us this grant in September and wanted us to use it by the end of July, and it's just been physically impossible. So we got an extension for that. So that's why it's a little bit bigger number.
Can you explain where that is and everything?
Yeah, the troller's work float is going to go off the end of the skiff float in the North Harbor Basin where we had all that dredging, kind of roughly where piston and rudder, just inboard of that. And then the launch float is going to replace the launch ramp float that is there now. The fish cleaning station, it's pretty much going to double the size of it. We qualified under the same granting agency through the Sport Fish Division, so I worked with those guys and we got this grant for doing that. Hopefully it'll help with our sea lion issue, but as well as just give those guys a little bit bigger area too. We've been right now we have, or in the history, we've had different fish cleaning stations around the harbor, and with the sea lion issue, we're having a hard time monitoring it, kind of corralling all of that. So we're focusing more on trying to get most of the fish cleaning and that kind of stuff in one general area and train people as well as the animals So,
Okay.
so therefore, that's why that is. Then the new roof, we had a little scare here about a month ago. We were doing, activity and stuff, went up on the roof and saw, our building is 30-some years old, 32 years old, I believe, original roof. It had pitted so bad from the seagulls and from other things that we actually had to change out a portion of it immediately. I could fit it into our maintenance budget. But the rest of the building also needs to be done. And so I just got a quick estimate from one of the local guys, and that's what that number is. Kayak float, we have a lot of people that are using this area as a great destination to traverse Kupernoff Island or these in-water areas. And so we got a lot of parties that come through here on kayaks and jet skis and things like that. Don't necessarily really work to put them in a stall. And we don't have any place that really lends itself well to kind of taking care of these kayakers and things like that. So we wanted to build a little float. What we'll do, it's, when you go out and start price tagging a new float, it's considerably higher than that. So our plan is to take the old fish cleaning station, clean it up, put some, amenities for those folks on that, and then relocate it in front of the harbor office. We have an area that we've kind of designed for this in this new North Harbor project. So kind of reuse some of our old stuff, clean it up, and make a facility for them. Oil containment tray, that is, if you've been around the harbors, it's those great big 13-yard dumpsters. Everything goes in there, and including waste oil buckets, things like that. And there's residual stuff left. And so my maintenance guy's been working with the Baylor guys, and they've kind of been designing a collection tray for those big 13-yarders. Now we know with the recycle program there's going to be big changes in the whole collection of the garbage at that level, and since we're kind of the face a lot of people see when they first come to town, we want to make sure that we address it in a reasonable, responsible manner. So we've been really talking kind of with the soldiers, the guys on the ground, how we're going to do that. And so, we might come back and abort this tray until we have a better idea on how we're going to do the whole recycling thing. So, I'm not sure that we're going to spend that money this year, but it's there if we get our act together.
Well, is the reason we need a containment tray is because people throw things where they're not supposed to?
Nope, they're supposed to do it
So
that
even
way.
old oil is supposed to go in those
It's
containers?
what happens is you have a 5-gallon bucket.
Drips. Empty containers still have drips in them.
Yeah,
Got it.
you
Okay,
have a
fair
5-gallon
enough.
bucket, you dump it, and then there's
Sure.
a little
Okay.
residual. So, yeah, or halibut slime or
I just-
whatever.
I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure I wasn't
Yeah, it's
enforcement issue
amazing.
versus
Nope,
okay.
nope. The building remodel plan, again, I referenced that the harbor office is 30-plus years old. It's it's the only public facility we have for showers, for bathrooms. They're really showing their age. We're having issues with just the piping in the walls and the drainage and all that kind of stuff. And so, I've gone to Leo and talked about what can we do, and we think the best approach is probably to get a Dieter Close or somebody like that to come in and kind of assess our situation of the new path because of the change of the ramp from the north side to the south side of the building. There'll be a different traffic flow. Should we look at maybe remodeling that building in the future? I have my ideas, but I'm not licensed or anything. So we wanted to, visit with somebody, not probably go out and full on hire some great big engineering person, but somebody that has a feel for what we're trying to do down there. So that's what that number is for. Again, just an estimate, kind of with Leo's help.
There's also an issue too. We did some energy efficiency stuff a couple years ago. Did some insulation and stuff. The harbor is probably, that area is definitely on the market would benefit from a heat pump rather than the oil issue that they have today. It's cheaper for them. So, you start trying to put a, air source heat pump there, you got to have a place for it, and you gotta decide how it's gonna fit inside the building from a standpoint of getting the air moved around. So that's part of it too, is making sure.
I've had Wally come down and assess the entire building, and he's given me a magic number and all of that. We did spend $25,000 on insulation and completely insulated the under the building through Leo's efficiency program. Was really a great help to that building that was built in the 80s when things were cheap and life was good. So we hope that we don't get Petro Marine every Friday, maybe every other Friday's visit.
So this
And
is
then-
this is the same building that you're putting the new roof on. Will you put extra insulation under that new roof while you're doing it, do you suppose?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely, we'll look at all of that. And, then the pedestrian ramp for the skiff float, that's a kind of a placeholder. That's a big if. If we can afford it, we'll consider it and really look at it. The skiff float was taken out. I'm talking about the poor man's float in the North Harbor, where a lot of the people from across come and use it. A lot of people that are just looking for an area close to town to come tie up and go to Napa or run up to the store and load and unload. That is the original, I think it was early 70s, that ramp was put in. It's a 55-foot ramp. Pretty straight up and down, really heavy, doing not damage, but definitely showing wear to that aged skiff float that wasn't replaced as part of the North Harbor. That was taken out, dredged around, and then we just put it back together kind of as is. And so I've been looking at ramps around the country, and Ole Whitethorn built for OW Enterprise built Icicle, a beautiful ADA compliant aluminum ramp that is lightweight over there at, if you ever wandered around, it's great. Anyway, so I went to him and I said, hey, what would something like that cost? And so he kind of got back to me and said, well, probably 50,000, something like that. He wasn't really sure because Icicle bought all the materials and he just did the labor for him. But anyway, so that's kind of where that's from, where that number came from. And again, I mentioned the troller work float is going to be positioned off the end of the skiff float. So we envision a lot more traffic in that area. So we're trying to look forward to see that just primarily for safety issues and things like that.
So, not to get too far down in the weeds, but going back to the ramp improvements, will that address some of the slipping, falling, tripping stuff that's been happening?
Well, that kind of goes back to this contingency number too. You remember that that was kind of, it's hard when you're building these budgets to look 18 months out. And so we didn't have the replacement into this year's budget. So that's why we went back to you and asked if we could, do that, and you'd let us. And so we're doing that now, actually. We just got one of the pieces of equipment today. We're going to start on that project, which is a $15,000 project to completely resurface both ends of the South Harbor. So this is above and beyond. What this is if you notice in the new North Harbor, they have sides on the ramp that has reduced the amount of snow buildup and slippering issues because of that. And so what we're looking at is putting sides on at least one side, the weathered side of those South Harbor ramps. And so we feel we could do it for $1,000 a ramp or something like that. That's what that's about.
So debt service, which is just their bond payments, which their bonds will mature in 2021.
Yes.
We'll still be here. We'll throw a party.
Yeah. We will.
And that was for the South Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get to the end.
And just maybe to give you just a little bit, I know, Bob, you're especially interested in kind of the history of where we are. Just real briefly, in 1996, the state decided, DOT, to get out of the harbor business, and they let it be known. And in 2006, they actually accomplished that pretty much statewide. In 2006 is when the city at the point said, okay, we really have to start developing a deferred maintenance plan, putting away money for projects. The harbors in Alaska are in a very unique situation in that we have a special funding source, and it's called the 50-50 match. So what we need to do when we look at replacing originally owned state harbor facilities, which many of our projects that are on our capital list actually qualify for, we need to show up with 50% of the project, or what we can do. So that's kind of where we're at, and we weren't in the position, and that's in the early 2000s to do that when it came time to replacing the South Harbor. Therefore, we went out and did a bond, had this bond, and so that was kind of the first batch of the raw fish tax money was going to pay for this bond that we still currently have. We have, just checking it with Jody, about $724,000 left in principal on that bond, and $120,000 about of interest. And so if we ever get money ahead, the good news on the North Harbor is that's currently where all of our savings is right now, dedicated towards that. I'm hoping to transfer back from that project. It's looking pretty good at maybe $500,000 back into our savings account, the Harbor Enterprise Fund, and joined with this year's raw fish tax, which we got in October. That was considerably higher than the $150 on our adopted budget, and hopefully next year. So, the harbor's in a pretty good position that maybe a year or two down the line we can come to you and say, can we pay this bond off quicker than we have it scheduled? Or maybe it's a good use of, just not putting all our eggs in one basket. So I feel really good about this budget, just to put my little 2 cents in. It was about 10 years ago when we actually had to borrow against the general fund, and we had a loan, kind of a loan from the general fund, and we were able to pay all that back, and now we're sitting pretty good. So we've come a long way in this transition period.
Well, a couple.
So.
What was the North Harbor? Was it 9 million total? Or was it 7?
Well, the construction part of it is 7.2. Engineering, design work, all of the permitting, all of the stuff that we had to do for the dredging, that kind of stuff. Killer deal, by the way. It was about 8.2.
So
yeah, 8.2, 8.4, somewhere
So,
in that range. So
here's where I start to get, I'm not arguing with Flo, but if you take that number, and what's a harbor life? 50 years, 40 years?
we're hoping 60 again, like the
Okay.
old North Harbor. Yeah.
And you do, divide it out, add reasonable, inflationary issues, and then you take into account the 50-50 match, assuming that still exists 60 years from today. The North Harbor alone, we should probably be putting somewhere around $90,000 a year aside. That's, that goes to nothing just for your future North Harbor replacement. If you start doing that with every piece of infrastructure that Glow has, and many of them are not North Harbor, meaning they're not going to last another 60 years, it adds up in a hurry. And
And that magic number this year is 800,000.
and I'm not sure that number is all that accurate. That's an accounting number that, that's not doing, which is one of the things we'd like to do with the comprehensive plan, is do a harbor development and infrastructure analysis. But because, is that an accurate number? I just gave you a number that's probably pretty close, about $90,000 a year for the North Harbor. And you got, she got a lot, let alone her building. There's a lot more infrastructure there. So is it 800,000 or is it 500,000 or
Well,
is
and
it?
it depends a lot on how many years you're depreciating.
Right.
Like if you pick 60, it's a lot different from
Accountants-
40. So.
Yeah. So you get the idea. And we don't. That's a moving target right now. I don't know the number, but it can have some pretty major impacts on how she configures a budget. How much money should they have putting aside every year?
Well,
This goes purely to
and
capital
that
projects.
a lot of these projects are this deferred that you're talking about. I mean, we have a utility float that's 30-some years old, and we'll, you know, if we can put, right now, you pretty much expect that cost of a float is $200 a square foot. And so you're looking at a $400,000 thing that we could, you know, go out and get a 50-50 match for maybe sometime in the next 10 years, and so we have to come up with our half.
So that's the biggest challenge with
When we
the
put
budget.
to bed these projects, you know, and everything will be kind of, then I'm hoping to have a good idea.
Are you ready for some overall comments now? From my perspective, I'd rather see that contingency. I agree with the contingency, but I think it ought to be in Steve's hands for all the departments, and it ought to be bigger. So that you can make the choice of where that money, you know, I know there's things come up, and I don't think it ought to go through. I'm, you know, nickel diming us, you know, for 10,000 years. So I'd rather see Steve have that option to be able to make some of those choices. When a pump goes out or something else, we can replace it. And so from my perspective, I'd rather see Steve have that in the overall budget.
Well, and I appreciate that. I mean, the you know, at a $20,000 level, you know, if the assembly approved, you know, take a close number here, purely for the harbor, I do have that authority. So Glow comes up with a project halfway through the year and says, Steve, I got to spend 10,000 of that contingency on fill in blank. I can sign off on that, up to 30,000.
Because we can only do 5,000.
We can only do 5.
So internally, we can handle smaller projects as long as there's a contingency budgeted. So individual, you know, you could put 100,000 here, and if she had individual projects that each were under 30, I can sign off on them. Currently, anything over 30 in the assembly has to see it, or anything unbudgeted.
Now, are
That's the
you
key.
saying that you would prefer that be in a general fund versus in the harbor budget?
Mhm.
And
So-
that's what I interpreted.
Yeah.
And that's harder
So that
just
you
because
can-
of trying to keep
you're
the.
the man with making the big dollars, and you can make those decisions, and rather than come to us for some of those.
Yeah.
Well, and you could have an internal policy that just
Yeah.
said, no one's allowed to code anything through their contingency fund without the
Yeah.
borough manager's approval. And, yeah, I could go in there and pull reports anytime and see if anything got.
One nice
Big
thing.
challenges from the auditor's perspective, though. They're going to want to see, you know, well, that's a good question. I don't know what they're going to want to see. Would they want it budgeted separately? You know, in other words, in each enterprise fund versus the general fund, or is it a totally separate fund that you're setting up, a special expenditures fund that you put money into? You know what I'm
It needs to be
saying?
set up like this. The harbor's contingency needs to be in their harbor fund. And you'll notice when we start talking about the general fund, there's a contingency in there in the general fund, just for the general fund departments.
So
One night-
there is some accounting issues there, just making sure that we don't make our auditor mad at us.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you having some of that option to do it without even bothering, because those.
Well, we're
things
pushing
come up
these
with
contingency
pumps.
funds. I mean, I'll call it what it is. It's faster. I mean,
Well,
there are
yeah.
some things that
Of course.
come up, we can't wait for a meeting, or it's really difficult to wait for a meeting.
Well, like this ramp thing, you know, I mean, I needed to have the go-ahead to go on it, to order this stuff, 3 months, you know, and then now we have to install it, and we're kind of under the wire because pedestrian traffic is up in the South Harbor, and so we gotta get going now. The weather just turned, so we're gonna start this tomorrow, you know, kind of a thing, so I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
My second comment on this, and I'll walk to the second one, is that you've got a lot of stuff on your plate right now with everything going on.
Yeah.
And I've got concerns about, and I have no problem with what you're proposing here. The question I have is whether or not you can handle all that, you know, with your staff and what you're doing, or whether it would be just to delay some of it. And the other part of that is, I'm not sure from my perspective, what you're proposing for building remodel there. I've been in your building a number of times, and I'm not sure we shouldn't look at that a little bit bigger at some point down the road, rather than to look at it just with, you know, individual people around town and so forth, and put it on some kind of a priority list of what we want to do.
Well, that's kind of where I'm just getting our feet wet. I've gone to Leo, and this was his advice to go out and get somebody, contract with somebody that could help us, that's good at public building footprints, how, I mean, the way it's set up, it's just kind of a screwball thing. There's no door to the public on the Main Street side. There's, the layout, the layout of the bathrooms is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's goofy. The building's goofy.
But it's a low priority, people. It's like we've lived with it for 35 years, and we can continue to live with it. But at some point,
Yeah.
The biggest,
I mean-
probably the driving force also for us is, again, referencing back this huge transition into borough-owned harbors, where we used to not have a maintenance department because the state owned anything over $10,000. The state was on the hook to fix. So we just kind of fixed little odds and ends. We painted things. That's about it. Now we're to the point where we're accumulating equipment to go out and change dock rods and stuff, and I'm doing all of that out of that tiny little back room. My dream, if you just let me talk a little bit, is to rebuild the underpins for the old approach dock between us and Trident, and put a separate steel building out there, cheaper steel building, but relocate Ben out of the back room, where we have to move everything out every morning and put it all back every night, to allow him to do a lot of stuff that he's begging. I mean, he sets up at the baler regularly, thanks to Carl and his crew. He sets up regularly up at Public Works. It works, but it's also one of those things where I have a tiny staff. I have 7 people, including myself, that a lot of times Ben right now, our maintenance guy, is managing the office because Eddie and I are here. We run a really, really tight operation, and so it's hard to have him up at the baler not being able to cover. And so again, I'd like to maybe look at down the future of putting the maintenance in its own little room there.
So you're making my argument for me.
Well,
Yeah.
she is,
Yeah.
but I mean, I'll
But responsibly, I'm an enterprise fund, and if
know.
I don't spend it, it goes back into our savings, and we run it like a business. And
I'm concerned you still
Hi.
have enough time to do this effectively. That's my only
yeah,
concern.
yeah, we're trying. So,
And,
yeah,
and I
appreciate
have all
that.
kinds of ideas, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I just think
Appreciate
it's-
that.
I just think it's,
Yeah.
we need to slow down and concentrate on what we gotta get done.
Well, and I think we've done a good job. We've ramped up.
I'm not arguing.
All of these projects have been in the wind, on the burner for 20 plus years, and I think our preparation, I have to hand it to our fleet, and the whole entire community has been so excited about all of these things, these 3 major projects that we have, that they've been really accommodating and done a good job. So anyway, we'll get through it. And
Any more questions for Glenn?
anything you want us to do differently. This is not, you don't get to vote today, but
Yeah.
now's the time to tell us if we have to make substantial changes to this budget before it's presented to you at the first meeting in May, to basically start the voting process on. This applies to all of our budgets. Takes 3 readings. So, and with the schedule as tight as it is, first reading is first meeting in May, second reading will be the second meeting in May, and the final reading, hopefully budget approval, is the first meeting in June. And we're out of time, obviously. Our fiscal year starts July 1st. So, again, these work sessions, this is the time to try to hash out any major changes or that you need done to this before you can prove it when we get to May.
And then the following pages are just for ongoing capital projects for the North Harbor and the train dock and the commercial drive down dock. I won't go over those. It's pretty self-explanatory. All right.
Steve, I had one thing for you, actually.
Yes, sir.
On the depreciation,
Yep.
800,000. For some reason, that number strikes me as a bit low.
It does me as well, by the way. Yeah.
Well,
It's an accounting number. I mean, we
But aside from that, As we're both saying it's a bit low, where would you put it?
I don't know. I can't. That's one of the problems I have because I'm not a marine engineer. The cost that Glow deals with to replace things are just beyond belief. Every time I turn around, it costs that much. It's you, and that's not a shot at Glow. That's just
Of course.
It's when you get P&D involved or these various entities that have to weigh in. This stuff gets incredibly expensive, and I don't think we've got a great number. And that's why, I think on an earlier email I sent out.
Yeah, I got that.
You know, I'm not suggesting we do any major radical changes to the budget, but I'm definitely recommending that at some point we do a very expensive rate study, an infrastructure study that says, what do we have here, and what's the true depreciation number? I've used this argument with some of you before. You know, this is a capital asset. This table, it's probably fully depreciated. We're still using it. I mean,
Well, and a lot of the harbor stuff is so old.
It's
it
fully
has been
depreciated.
fully depreciated, and in a perfect world, we'd have this huge fund with all this money
Right.
to, you know.
and that's where I'm
replace
coming
it.
from. Is that
Well,
I mean, this table's still very usable, but you can't be set. You know, there are things fully depreciated in the harbor that we're still using. You know, and
So
so
that might be why it was.
you know that's great, but we don't have necessarily the funds set aside to replace it either. And how many more years does that
yeah.
trawler float or whatever have really
Right.
sit out there? And I don't have an answer.
I think though, if you
Yeah.
do look at the harbor, it is actually pretty well brought up. I mean, we did major depreciation or maintenance in 2000, brand new float system in 2004 in the South Harbor. The Middle Harbor is brand spanking new as of 2008. The North Harbor brand spanking new as of next month. So I mean, we've gone through and done all of the anode protection in the South Harbor now. We're all the anode protection on the crane dock. Things are in pretty good shape. We qualified for the Dingle Johnson money to do the launch ramp upgrade. That will sunset in 2016. So, I mean, the facility is in pretty good shape. And that's probably why that number went down a little, because of the North Harbor and the Middle Harbor are brand spanking new. So,
It just worries me when you look at
Yeah.
what
yeah.
what it costs to replace the North Harbor.
That's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah,
Money on hand
it
to save
starts,
everything.
and we don't have a lot of money on hand at the current time. Although
No,
Glow's
'cause-
correct that with the big jump in raw fish tax because of last year's season, it'll help. But and she has to listen to me say this all.
Yeah.
That's if we're using the raw fish tax for that purpose and not needing it for operations. And in today's world, some of that ends up being used for
Well,
operations.
yeah, what that goes for is to pay that bond off.
So
Yeah.
that's not that you need to change anything, but
But
we
we're
all need to be
discussing
aware
Yeah,
of it. We
yeah.
it needs to be
And-
talked about.
It does, agreed.
And what can the market handle? It's interesting, you look at the different communities. We are the second highest in Southeast for moorage. Sitka's going through just quite a chaotic experience right now, where they've tried to transfer all of their income, their new income, to the transient boaters, and so they've tripled their transient moorage, kept their permanent guys down low. We had the last rate increase in January, which was pretty aggressive towards the bigger boats. So it's kind of what can the market handle too. So currently we take about 800,000 in permanent moorage. And we've tried to address that by, in this new North Harbor project, we realized that because of John Murgis and people taking their boats out and putting them on his project or property, we have built the new North Harbor more in line for larger boats that can't get hauled out. So we've cut back on the small stalls and increased the bigger stalls. So I hope that moorage fee will raise because of it, because that's where real money is in those bigger boats. So trying to address
Yeah, thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a question that kind of goes along with this. I'm worried about our war chest, and I think that's a bad name for it, just a survival chest, I guess. Where I think with the general funds and your funds, we need to have more savings. And this is something I'm gonna ask, each enterprise fund is, if you had to cut something to save money, what would you cut? And if, on the obverse is where do you think you could make more income?
The
Again,
obvious,
putting it toward the,
the
savings.
obvious, if you're just talking straight savings, would be staff. And so, double-edged sword. You start cutting staff, and then pretty much why, just be open.
But that would
That's
be the logical
probably.
area to cut.
We don't have a lot of area to cut. I guess there's really, projects. But right now, my projects are really under about 100,000 total. Because the big ones, of course, are all grant funded. So I could, if you're talking, not do the pedestrian ramp is probably that's probably what I'd
Something
cut.
like that.
Yeah,
And
that's what I'd
for
cut.
raising income, other than mortgage rates, that would just be the
Yeah,
logical one.
that's-
That'd be about it.
Yeah.
And I'll-
Increasing our storage area, but it's gonna cost you to do that. So, right
Because I know
now-
with the drive down and other things, are you going to be losing money with crane fees or? And that's what I'm trying to do is
Yeah.
see, or
we run
should
about
be-
$23,000 a year in crane
crane
fees.
fees,
So, it's not a huge number.
but if it's a loss, then I was trying to.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll have to see. I don't know that we're gonna lose all that much. Maybe we will. Maybe we'll lose all 20. I doubt it, but that's to kind of know what your clientele is, who your clientele is.
Are there any places like with a new drive down dock or any of the other areas? I don't even know. Do we charge a fee for landings at Scow Bay and things? Because
Like
you
that.
have like a dock fee for South Harbor and
Yeah.
things like that. Are there other places where you see income?
Oh yeah, sure. That drive down, we'll probably be able to tie up tour ships for longer periods of time. Also, the inside of the we've put up included in workstations on the inside of the drive down. So I'm hoping what that will encourage our boats to come to town to do long-term projects in
then
the
you'll
off
have a fee
season.
for those?
We'll have a fee for that, So yeah, that'll be a big asset. I think we're going to see increased business to town because of that facility alone. From all
Just to add
sorts
to
of-
what Bo said, I think the biggest threat or opportunity, however you want to look at it, is it's not as necessarily what she already has, but what she's asked to take on. I mean, Pappy's,
Yeah, that'll be huge.
Kupernoff,
Yeah.
dock, entrance island. I mean, well, the stuff that DOT keeps wanting to give to the borough. Scow Bay, it's a huge project. I mean, and there are people in town that would. I mean, John Murgus being one that is not happy with the harbor board and or the borough because we haven't gone out there and spent $3 or $4 million on that facility out there. I mean, you do that to Scow Bay, and Glow is adding to staff.
Yeah.
Right.
You add Papke's and State Dock at Kupernoff and say that they're our responsibility to maintain, has an impact on her budget.
Yeah.
What kind of
So,
income do we get from Scow Bay?
It's a lease right now
Yeah,
with John,
well,
and I don't know what the number is. I mean,
The lease is 4,100, I believe. It's and how we get those lease numbers, which we have all here, is 10% of the assessed value. So everybody has the same.
that's one of the things we did 2 years ago, a year ago.
Mm.
We moved all of the waterfront lease revenue to the harbor.
Yeah, they had most of it already. but
Yeah.
They added.
We had a couple.
To try to make it make sense, lining leases up with the appropriate
Mm-hmm.
department.
Okay, thank you.
3,900 is what John's is right now.
So, I mean, his 3,900 is not gonna pay for even what we have to pay today to maintain the facility.
It'll
let
pay to
alone-
gravel the potholes, right, Carl?
Sure.
We
But
get
that's-
emails at
but that's
7
a-
o'clock in the morning
Yeah,
from
but that's an
him.
example. I mean, is that, you know, there's a, just using Scow Bay, I
Right.
mean, if
Well,
in
if the
fact the
leases are making
assembly,
the maintenance costs, something's not right.
you know, that is an assembly level, you know,
Well,
how we,
that's-
how we do leases and
Yeah.
how, you know, it's an interesting, you know, I've threatened before, so, you know, Scow Bay is a great example. If it's such a valuable asset, maybe somebody in the private sector wants to buy it from the borough, and we'll solve this problem all in one big fell swoop.
Yeah.
You know, they can
I
have
think
it.
that's a down the road
I
decision.
mean, yeah, you know.
But, yeah, and we need to have that discussion.
But anyway, but to John's point, the biggest challenge that Glow's going to have isn't necessarily how to save money in her existing budget. It's how to keep it from creeping because of added facilities and added expenses.
I guess from my perspective, if we get to the vote, I think that $15,000 is throwing down a rat hole myself, because I think you got some good ideas and they aren't all thought through, and I'd like to hold off on that from my perspective. And I think that I would probably take that $60,000 and hold it, I'm not disagreeing with it, but, you know, do it some other time, and maybe next year.
I'm with you on that.
I'm not arguing, you know, I'm not arguing the need, I'm just saying the timing.
Well, and again, it's on there because we gotta look 18 months down the, you know, we'll have lived with the facility for a year, and then maybe we'll come and say, you know what? We've had, you know, 4 broken ankles here this year because of it, and it's there, and we do. But again, it's this enterprise fund. This money doesn't have to be spent. You know, like in other budgets, if you don't spend it, you lose it. It's not that way here. And so, yeah, so we're a little bit lucky that way.
So have we beaten Glow into submission?
She's still breathing.
Exciting! It's so exciting! Things are good. I just have to give you the good news. We got 2 brand new boats in the shipyard going to be launched this spring that are moving to Petersburg, you know, additions to our fleet. The younger guys are picking up some of the you know, the big seine boats of yesterday. The harbor's picking up, you know, prices are good, and it's great. I mean, they're getting $10, $12 a pound for brown crab, over $9 last year. It's been a good spring, and I think it'll be good.
But how much of our fleet is Alaskan or Petersburg?
Well, just a little bit more of a history lesson. There's 15,000 state-owned fishing permits in the entire state of Alaska. Petersburg runs anywhere between 12 and 1,300, so we own 10% of the entire state-owned fisheries hail out of Petersburg. So,
But of the boats that are moored, what percentage is out of state and what percentage is here?
golly, I would say primarily, probably about 90% of the boats in the harbor. Many of the boats that are from out of state haul out. They're the smaller boats,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, we got a great thing going.
An interesting trend that I'm noticing over at the chamber, though, is I'm getting more and more calls about liveaboards, retirees who are finding
yes.
Petersburg a place that they want to, especially Alaskans who want to stay in the state but don't necessarily want to be north and are looking at Petersburg as the place
It's
to
been
come.
amazing. We've had, I had a couple $1 million tour boats, yachts in the harbor, and they love it because of the freebies. I just have to let you know that this is a really attractive community because of that.
Isn't there a percentage limit on how many liveaboards there can be in the harbor?
We have our policy. It's not in statute or anything, but our policy is we don't want to grow over 10% of the liveaboard. And the reason because of that is economical based, because if we start tying the harbor up with boats that never move, then the transient, we do a lot with a little here. You look at Sitka that has 1,100 stalls. We have 577. And we're constantly turning that over because so much of our fleet is commercial and gone. If that were to change and those boats never left, we'd really have to look at our raising moorage for those
What is the
boats.
percentage at right now?
How many liveaboards do we have? We have like,
Dozen, maybe?
yeah, 17 liveaboards right now, something like that. And when we say 10%, we say 10% in every stall class. So,
Gotcha.
like, so, you don't end up with, because they tend to be in the 50-foot class. And if we run all of the commercial guys out, over attrition, then it would hurt everybody's bottom line.
Thank you.
No more questions for
Thank you.
Chloe? Going once, twice, 3 times. Wraps it up.
Thanks, everybody. Onward and upward.
Okay, onward to the general fund. So the front page here is just a summary of what we're gonna find inside. You'll notice if you go to the very bottom of the page, and the one that I emailed to you, I don't know if it had it, but it just talks, the line says, our fund balance policy says that we are going to keep 4 to 6 months of operating expenses in the general fund, which is between 3.03 million and 4.5 million. Currently, we're at 3.9 million. So, and you can see that said unassigned fund balance end of the year right there on the very bottom there. So we're within. It's not, we're right in the middle there. So we're
Judy,
comfortable.
a couple of years ago, remember the auditor saying something like 4 to 6 million. Is that is that another senior moment I'm having? That he suggested that was a healthy fund balance.
I don't remember that, but they might have been including at that time the transfers out, and that's not really part of the operating expenses of the general fund. But yeah, if you go back and look and see what they.
But this
he
is
might have just pulled
considered
it
a
out.
healthy balance.
Yeah.
Till I
don't
get
know,
my
but-
hands on it, though,
Yeah.
'cause I keep, when it comes to our police building, I keep talking about the potential of taking some of that balance to help fund the police station renovation, so.
So if you
That
look
would
at the
hurt.
front page, if you go down, I put a subtotal in for the expenditures, just so you can see the operating expenses, we are a little bit lower than last year. But then if you include the transfers out, which is $500,000 for the harbor, it's on the very last page, and we budgeted to transfer $437,000 into a property development fund. And we'll talk about that more later. What we did with this budget, we made some big assumptions. We assumed that service, and we can go to the first page for the revenues. We assumed that property taxes, we'd use the same mill rate for service area 1 as we did last year. And we assumed 4 mills for service area 2. We're thinking, I'm estimating at the end of this year, I'm gonna bring in a little over $3 million in sales tax. So that's how we came up with that. We just used the same number. We're not increasing it by a certain percentage or anything. We have we booked the full amount of the fisheries business tax, and I'm on the second page here, page 2. I'm just going down the revenues. Fisheries business tax to $800,000, and again, then $500,000 will be transferred out to the harbor, and that'll be found on the last page. State revenue sharing, that's a number we get directly from the state each year. If you notice under the state charges for services, there's a jail contract increase this year by about $50,000. And why is that, Kelly? That didn't increase so much? They just recalculated what?
Yeah, I think they looked at just the cost of doing business and gave us that increase. It wasn't something that I'm aware of that Agner asked for before he left.
Okay. And on page 3 for revenues, and just stop me, I'm just kind of going down the, there, you'll see ambulance fees. We're talking about increasing ambulance fees in the future. They haven't been increased for a really long time, but that's not in this budget. Recreational activities fees, that's all of Donnie's, that's all of Parks and Rec's revenues that they bring in. Going further down, just looking for anything. investment income is horrible. We over budgeted for this current year, so that's why there looks like there's a big drop. Overhead, that's just a calculation. You'll find that in all the enterprise funds budgets for expenses, and they transfer money
Go
to
ahead and
us.
explain why.
So they pay the general fund for things that the general fund does for them, like cuts their AP checks, does their payroll, handles all their AR issues, attorney fees, the council making decisions and lobbying for them.
Utility billing, isn't that part of it too?
Yep, utility billing. My finance department, obviously, yeah, utility billing. Before we allocate costs to Mountain View Manor and Harbor, we take out the utility billing person because the Harbor does their own billing right now, and Mountain View Manor does their own billing. One of my main goal this year is to take over the Harbor billing and get it into our utility billing program. So if someone that's getting an electric bill for their stall, that their Harbor mortgage would also be on that bill, and then they'd be able to pay it online and whatnot. But the Harbor has a 10% discount right now when people pay in advance, and it's kind of throwing off my whole billing plan. So that's something to talk about in the future when we get there. We're not quite there yet.
But yeah, the overhead is Jody's got a formula. It's calculated based on revenue, and it's just, it's not a dollar for dollar trying to figure it out, but we just came up with an allocation formula, and so.
Is that revised yearly, or is that something that you?
Yeah, I take the prior year's actuals
Okay.
and then use those.
And again, it's, HR, so.
Yeah, or, if I get a new accounting software or something, that's going to apply for everyone, and so we charge it back,
Yeah.
a portion of it.
And it's not charged to general fund departments. In other words, Donnie in Parks and Rec does not get an overhead charge, because it's basically all in the general fund.
Yeah,
That's like
it's
charging
just
yourself.
included.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is to
Yeah.
charge the enterprise
But
funds.
the general fund is part of the allocation, so they
Correct.
just absorb like 50%
Right.
of it, the cost. And at the very end, you'll see a transfer in it. It's called interfund transfers from the National Forest Receipts School. So right now, we have a fund balance of approximately $2.7 million in Secure Rural Schools funding, and this is just to be used for the schools. So the $605,000 will be part of the $1.8 million that the school asks for each year. And the remaining $1.2 million will be paid to the school through property taxes. So if the elementary school's doing that siding project, that $1 million of that, the match, the 30% match that they needed, came from this fund. And we just kind of hold on to it, sort of not stockpile it, use it for their capital projects and a portion for their operations. And we're trying to ratchet down using it for their operations and more property tax money, but it's hard.
Well, the challenge there, there's two big comments. First is Secure Rural Schools, the feds have ratcheted that down every year. The assumption is that they'll continue to do that to the point, at some point, that it goes away. Today, roughly $600,000 of our funding to the school comes from this fund. So if the federal government kills that program, right away the school's going to be $600,000 under their funding unless the borough finds another way to make that up.
Didn't they say in 21 that would be zero?
That's what they're currently saying.
Yeah.
Now, who knows? But it's so. We wanted to be able to use that fund balance to stay there as much as possible, so that if they kill it in a fit of Congress not being able to get along, and we give the school and the borough an opportunity, a year or two to kind of, okay, what do we do now? So that's why we kind of wanted to keep that fund balance there and not spend it all. The problem is the school continues to have pretty major maintenance issues come up, and I think there's $95,000 that the school wants this year in just their what I would call capital project maintenance program, you know, replace some concrete, you know, some controls on their heating HVAC system. So we end up spending, you know, we're gonna keep dipping into this fund to pay for these maintenance problems.
That's over and above the 1.8.
Yes.
Correct, exactly.
Yes.
So that's gonna eat into that fund balance, and if that trend continues, then we're gonna have less of a cushion if in fact Secure Rural Schools is killed someday.
Do we have then the option of just telling them that the 93,000 has to come out of the 1.8?
You have
You can do
any
it.
option you want. Yeah, that is the Assembly's decision.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure the school would want to come in and talk to you.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, but that's today. I mean, you know, back to Jody's point is we're using, you know, we get this money from the feds. We turn around and give 600,000 of it to the school, which is part of that 1.8. 1.2 is direct from property taxes. 600,000 is from Secure Rural Schools. And then in addition, the school makes capital project / maintenance requests that we fund.
So in each year, we've been getting about $1 million in Secure Rural Schools funding. So just so.
So, I mean, we're still ahead of the
Getting up a
game,
little
but
bit, yeah.
it's all it takes is one really big school project and that fund's empty. I mean, that's the,
And there were a couple of years they asked for 1.8, we gave them 1.6. That was before your time.
yeah, I can speak to that. They have, I mean, the 1.8 has been the request every year that I've been here.
Well, even
Yeah.
during then, and we just cut it a couple hundred because things were tight.
Anyway.
Okay, if we can go to expenses. If no one minds, can we just jump to the library, because Tara has to leave at 11:30.
Sure.
Page 21. So the only change in the library's budget is they actually budgeted for a full-time staff member. Currently, the only full-time person they have is Tara. And Tara, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So there's a couple of changes in our salaries and wages lines. The first is that we've always had about 24-hour-a-week position that's been eligible for benefits. The employee in that position for the last decade never drew down the benefits. So we never budgeted for them. So there's been a person who's been changed into that position on staff who will take full benefits for self and family. And so that increase, that's about 1/3 of the increase that you can see in our benefits line. The next one is what Jody just referred to, is that we're also asking this year that we turn this position from a 20 to 26-hour-a-week position into a 40-hour-a-week position and increase the level of responsibility for this position.
Maybe you should talk about you've seen a lot more activity at the library.
Yeah, so in my narrative, which is on page 20,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
on the right-hand side, there's the fourth quarter comparisons, and this is comparisons between both our checkouts and visits in the old facility and our new facility. And so you can see we've seen roughly a double increase in traffic, both into the building and also in terms of checkout. And I will say that staff has risen to the challenge, and they are doing a fantastic job. And they try and keep a smile on their face while they're doing it. But we're definitely pinched. I mean, we expected to see an increase in business, but I never expected to jump at quite that rate quite so soon.
And it's not even the summer yet.
And I think we're all a little worried that it's not even the summer yet.
So what user group has this increase come from?
I think it's across the board an increase, but I would say that by and large, youth, teens, and younger kids. Definitely, it's been youth. And right now, our clerk position that's 20 to 26 hours a week, we have a little bit of grant funding, which allows that person to work an extra 7 hours a week, and so they're able to do some technology work for us. They're able to spend a little more time with the teen advisory group, working with them. That will be ending on June 30th. And so part of my intent with increasing this is to keep those sorts of activities in what we do, because I think they're in high demand.
Does anyone have any questions for Tara?
Just kind of a general overall observation for everyone. the general fund in total, actually, the expenditures are slightly down, even with these changes. We were able to kind of build it in. So, now, we'll talk about things, some of the other budgets that we're giving up to make some of that happen, though. But,
If you didn't get the money and have a full-time position, what would you do?
We would see a cut in our services, not in hours, but in terms of things like the work we're able to do with programming for youth and our technology programming. You'd see a decrease in that come July 1 when our grant funding ran out. And I have actually, it's probably worth noting that I've made another change in my professional services line. It's gone down. And we have an opportunity this year. We spend a significant amount of our professional services budget for our automation system. It's how you check in and out books, and that's how you look things up. And we pay a lot annually. I think it's about $18,000. And so and also we maintain a server. It's a very expensive activity because you have to replace that server on a cycle, and also just have a systems administrator who works on it. And so we are going to be migrating around this time next year to a statewide consortial catalog where our costs go down to about $2,000 per year. So we're going to save about $15,000 every year, as well as save staff time by not hosting a server locally, hosting a server at the University of Alaska. So we're trying to offset some of the increase that I'm presenting with this particular cost saving. So I'm hoping that helps.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
On the 40-hour position, benefits go up quite a bit. Wouldn't it be cheaper to go to 220 hours?
I know I would need to run the numbers on that, and it would depend on the employee and what their benefits, what benefits
Because
they
at 20
choose.
hours, you wouldn't really have benefits, would you?
I
You
guess
have
I have to say that if we
prorated.
still have the need for the employees, that I have a problem with trying to hire two temporary people to avoid paying benefits. That's sort of a Walmart strategy, and
I
I
have the
wouldn't
same
encourage
problem. I have no problem with paying benefits.
The only thing I do is I don't like to see any budgets go up.
that. I understand that, but people have to live.
Sure.
And they
No,
need a
I-
living
Yeah.
wage.
I
And to speak
understand
to,
that
and to
too,
speak
but-
to John's point a
Yeah.
little bit, because I understand why he's asked the question. We have a crew of 12 to 16-hour week employees, and they're wonderful.
Yeah.
But a lot of them have to hold down second jobs, and a lot of them, it's cyclical. You don't really keep them on staff for quite as long. I think that having a 40-hour week position is going to allow us to have someone that assumes a level of higher responsibility, and I think with the facility and with the amount of business that we're doing, we really need that level of responsibility to ratchet up, which is why I'm really going to seek a 40-hour week position rather than two 20-hour week positions.
Just to talk on that point a little bit as well, that's something that we've discussed up at Parks and Recreation as far as the full-time positions versus part-time positions. It's definitely something we've discussed when it comes to our janitorial staff. We have a contracted staff right now versus we would like to at some point in the future look at actually have two employees to be able to do that. But with the new requirements of the Obamacare, I believe at 20 hours, and tell me if I'm wrong on this one, as I've talked to Debbie about that, anytime you have a 20-hour employee, you're basically paying them almost full benefits at that moment. So then you'd be knocking them down to like a 16 or 17 or something like that, and it does become more difficult to be able to schedule them in throughout your day. So I mean, there's all kinds of balances that have to be played there, but it has become much harder nowadays with the 20 hours.
Yeah, I think and Donnie's right. They're redefining what
Yeah.
constitutes full time in the near
Thank you,
future,
Dave.
and so that would actually affect
To-
that
to-
time position.
See, we're spying on you, so here's the answer to that question. Healthcare kicks in at 20 hours a week, PERS kicks in at 15 hours a week.
Okay.
So the minute they hit anything above 15 or above, we're having to pay PERS anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, and we really struggle to keep our 12 to 14s under 15 and keep up with the level of business that we see. So
Yeah, it's probably just have some consistency.
yes, that sort of continuity is nice.
And I know, again, my concern is a higher budget. And one of the people I talked with this summer, Mario, who uses the library a lot, and he was really pretty upset because there's only one stall in the bathroom, and he feels that there should be at least two for his. He's just one of our local street people that visits there, but I don't know. So I told him I'd express his concern and pass it on. That's the only reason I mentioned it.
Very nice of you.
Yeah, thank you. But is the same thing that I asked Flo. Are there any areas where you think you can cut, or any areas where you can increase income?
Let's see. So in terms of any areas we could cut, well, as you can see, looking at our budget, really personnel is our single biggest
Right.
expenditure. Of course, you could always cut the book budget. We are fairly successful annually at getting grant money, which pads that, which is great. Of course, you never know.
Yeah, you've
That's
been
always
excellent at that.
competitive. So that's one item besides personnel that can be cut. But really, it's personnel, and when you cut personnel, you cut programs and services and hours.
Any other questions for Tara? Okay.
Thank you for taking the time, Mama.
Okay, and if any of you have any questions about the extra hours that I'm proposing, I'm more than happy to.
And everybody,
Talk about it, okay?
give her a big congratulations. She's closing on her house, so.
That's not in this budget.
She came in on her.
That was a large pay raise.
So let's move back to page 5.
Thanks, Tara.
Sorry, Donnie. Thank you. You're next, but we'll
I'm
go back
okay.
to first. Page 5.
If I said I had to leave at 11:30.
Yeah. I can't say anything. I already showed up a couple minutes late. I mean,
So you guys.
And if somebody needs a break, speak up and we can take a break whenever.
And I'm just gonna whip down these, and if anyone has questions, for the Borough Assembly on page 5, the $60,000 for the professional services, that's actually the $42,000 for the state lobbyists and the $18,000 for federal lobbyists. And then the $9,700 that for communications is for the iPad connectivity for everyone that's on iPads
You
now.
can have mine, we can reduce that expense.
And then the GoToMeeting program.
Yeah, we're trying to set up to use, what we could use GoToMeeting, which is an internet access space for people to dial in is the wrong word, access our assembly meetings through the internet rather than having to call in. And we're still, thanks to, Joe and friends, we're still working on some of they've done big helping with some extra wiring.
Okay.
And we're getting closer to making that happen.
Okay. And the administration budget, there's really not any changes. And attorney is pretty standard also. So we can move on to page 7 unless anyone has questions. Page 7 is information services, computer stuff, and then finance. So we used to have a full-time IT person, and it's not on in these columns, but in prior years, the budget for IT was normally about $150,000. So it has dropped significantly since we use some contract help. We have a large expenditure for to replace 4 servers to virtual servers. They're currently running on Windows 2003, and Microsoft has announced that Windows 2003 support ends July 2015. And we actually had a scare in January of one of the servers became corrupted, and I lost the sales tax program for 3 days. So I'm a big proponent of this increase if it means protecting all of our stuff. Steve and I talked with their IT people for a long time to determine whether we should go with virtual servers or stay with just the normal hardware servers. But we think that it is a large upfront cost, but I think it's the wave of the future. And
Is a virtual server the cloud?
Pretty much, yeah. It's
It'll be a private
It's a
cloud,
private
yeah.
cloud. But what it does is it gets rid of the hardware, most of the hardware requirements here. So instead of having blade servers in a rack up at the fire hall or in this building, they basically go away.
Is our 911 system separate from that, or is that a part of
Correct.
that?
That is currently separate, and we don't I wish it to be in the cloud. There's some issues with security if it goes to the
Okay.
cloud. But the reason I say that is because, you know, we're talking about renovating this building for PD and such. You know, that was always a concern, you know, closer to the water, that computer equipment can be ruined if you had some kind of tsunami situation. So going to the cloud fixes a big part of that. I just don't know that we can do that with the 911 servers because of security concerns. I mean, Kelly's got to work with our computer provider and walk through some of that, just because of, you know, changes in, you know, like our computer provider may have to fingerprint all of their employees because they've got access to the server.
But we have a backup up at the station, don't we?
For the
Some.
E911 system?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
My other question is, this 47,000 in 15-16 will go down or will stay the same?
Won't be there
Oh,
next
won't be
year.
there.
Okay, so it's just a one-time.
Yeah. It's interestingly enough, we could have stayed with a hardware model where you buy servers, have them configured, and they're located somewhere. And with that model, we could spread the cost. It's about the same cost, but we could actually choose to spread it out over several years. But at the end of it, we still have hardware, and you're subject to the whole issues of it wearing out. The cloud, the advantage of that is you're having to pay subscription services to use their storage and their facility, but you don't have to worry about the things breaking. You don't have to worry about a computer room or, you know, all of the associated local costs of having to maintain it. Plus, our IT guys, it's much easier for them to manage remotely because it's out there in the cloud. We need storage, or we need to add a certain type of software. They can do it from their location. They don't have to lay hands on a server, so we don't have to fly them out here. There's some advantages. The costs are it's really kind of spreading it out over a period of time, spend the same amount of money, spend it all at once and be done with it, and then you just have subscription services to deal with. We chose this model is pretty much everywhere is going that way. And
Do we have a sense of what the subscription service is now?
I don't have it here, but it's already built into the budget, in the sense of you're paying for storage, so it doesn't go up until the day that we have to say we need more.
Right, and she said that we'll have some extra room, especially now the library is gonna go onto the states, the universities.
We'll
server.
kill that library server.
Oh.
I mean, we'll retask it if we need to,
We'll have
but
extra
it
room
goes
for
away.
other
Okay.
things
And
for a few more years.
yeah, I mean, he seems to think we will not be looking at spending money in this area for, you know, at least 3-4 years out.
Okay.
I mean, all it takes is one major change out in the real world, and I suppose that could go away. But you know, it's what you're buying when you do this is you're buying disk space, is what it amounts to. And he feels that this should do it.
In the finance budget, high department, there's nothing really out of the norm. I've increased the credit card fees to 22,000. That's for property taxes. So if you don't know this, you can pay your property taxes with your credit card, and more people are doing so. And so it's going up. In fact, I didn't budget enough this year for it, but I'm hoping to pick it up in one of the other line items.
One thing that's not in here, and I'll do this throughout this budget, is kind of maybe point out some things to you. You know, at some point, we'd love to digitize our records. You know, get rid of file cabinets and move. You know, to do that, there's some hardware costs as well as, you know, people costs to do it, to get it all converted. We're choosing not to. We've got too many things going on with borough formation, ordinances, everything else. It's not the right time to try to take on that project. So,
What would you have to increase fees for to make up for the credit card cost?
well, I can.
Would you have to put like
I can
1
answer
2%
that.
on that? or-
It's perfectly
credit
legal
card.
for municipalities to charge credit card fees back
Right.
to the customers. We choose to not do that. Okay.
It's always an issue. They used
Of
to do
course.
it years and years ago.
What would those fees have to be, just if we did?
It's generally you.
It would be about 2%.
2%?
Yeah.
Transportation.
So you can, municipalities have a waiver. It silly as it sounds, certain credit card companies, you know, you get Visa, MasterCard, American Express, each of them, just using those, Discover, they have cardholder agreements for vendors that you have to follow. And using American Express as an example, because I know it fairly well, they do not allow a retailer to pass that 2% on to the cardholder. So in other words, you can't, I'm going to buy it with my American Express card, I'm going to charge you 2% more. Or in case of American Express, I think it's 4%. When you sign up with them to accept their card, you say, I'm not going to pass those charges on to anyone. But the difference is with municipalities, there's some waivers for that.
Right.
So we actually could choose to charge our customers a convenience fee for using a credit card. We choose not to.
I think it really helps with the collection issue of it by taking credit cards. I think
Oh,
it
sure.
decreases the foreclosure list dramatically. I mean, it never gets quite to the foreclosure, the end result, but it's nice. We could do the fee.
What do you
It's
think
up
it
to
reduces
them.
that list? Maybe I'll fill in the blank and you check me if I'm wrong, because someone's having a hard time paying it, pay with their credit card, and they have their credit card company instead of us.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Right.
exactly what's happening.
Sure.
Yeah.
So.
Or they're
it-
getting mileage.
Yeah,
Sure,
but
of course.
Well,
It's okay.
and that's the thing too, the Alaska Airlines cards are a higher fee to use them because they're a signature card, and so we get
Interesting.
deemed a little bit more than just a normal bank
That's what
card.
most of them are, I imagine.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But I'm thinking that what's buried in this number is the same as Glo was saying, that there's staff time that you're not spending. And so it doesn't show up in that line item, but there actually is a lower cost to us if you trade that off.
Comparable, hopefully.
I mean, it's one of those things that, you know,
It's a kind of a fee.
people can do auto pays with credit cards, so they're not coming into the office generally to talk to us.
Yeah, well, they're out of town, they just pay over there.
I mean, from my perspective on any of these things where people are able to pay for credit card in 22, 20, whatever it is, like, it's worth it. I think it's a great convenience factor for everybody to have it. I wouldn't be in favor of getting rid of any of it. It's a drop in the bucket, you know, in the big picture of the borough, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I agreed, and I don't think we should charge, but just so you're aware, you could if you
Noted.
decided you wanted to get that way.
You'll see the same issue in Parks and Recreation, and we're going to the point where most people are signing up online, and when they sign up online, they're using a credit card, and that credit card fee comes right back to us. And it's going to happen, and that's just where everybody's moving towards.
Yeah. Well, doing business.
We rarely have people pay with cash, or checks is a real rarity nowadays.
Oh, we still get so many times. Page 9. You have some more questions? Police and jail. Their benefit, you'll see their benefits went up a lot. They actually have quite a few employees that, remember what we talked about, that cover their families for health insurance, so you know, that's where you'll see that $23,000 increase in health insurance. Actually, I went and compared last year's to this year. They have $22,000 in travel and training budgeted, which is up. You want to explain that, Kelly?
Sure. A big increase in the travel and training budget. About 10,500 of that was to replace employees that we've lost over the last year. Both Agners left, and then we lost 2 dispatchers. And each one of our staff has additional duties that they're assigned. For example, Jim Agner was also the department armor and did the maintenance on all our firearms. Heidi did some of our training, and we need to replace those disciplines. Derek O'Soup recently left. He was a dispatcher that went to Public Works. He took care of our property and evidence. So we need to get people up to speed because, you know, that's a huge liability there. So that's our 4-year average was running about 14,000. Our normal expenses that I would look at for this year was about 12 and a half. So we would have been under if we didn't need to replace these disciplines where folks had left.
Makes sense.
Does anyone have any questions about the police or jail budget?
Good that you only have to spend $500 on jail maintenance.
Well, no offense, but we just don't. We just don't do a lot of
losing
it. It's kind of like,
track.
what do you do?
That's probably just all mop heads.
I thought that with the changing,
Right.
your 410s, actually we'd have a reduction in overtime and we're showing an increase in overtime. Is that?
Well, when I got the figures from Debbie, they put some overtime in there, an increase of about 6,200 overall, but there was about 7,500 for in-house training. We try to do 2 hours of in-house training a month just as continuing education. But we've made cuts in other places to try to offset that. I think, you'll see a drop in overtime with the 410s because that just gives us a little more flexibility. So this was based on the 6 8.5 hour shifts, not the 410s, and we're just going to have to play it out and see what the reduction is. But I foresee a good reduction there.
Well, and a couple things going on. Kelly somewhat touched on is training is a big deal. We Kelly's expertise and some help people he knows. We've identified some areas that we probably need to do some additional training with the officers on, just to beef up some of their skills, help them out. So we wanted to leave that in there. We wanted to make sure that we get that done. The other pieces we've had, let's call it as we've had increased drug traffic, and that's a factor. That's a big deal on overtime. Is they're in the middle of something, they can't walk home and go home. It's unlike, Tara's not here, so we can pick on her. At the end of the day, they want to go home, but all the books aren't reshelved. But they can shelve the books tomorrow. But we can't do the same thing in the police department.
I would have to get the numbers from the court, but in January we were seeing court case numbers that took the entire first quarter of last year to reach. So there's more activity. We're seeing an increase. And we probably will continue to see an increase just from the 410 model because that gives us better coverage. So that gives us the officers more time to go out and do self-initiated activities and be more proactive rather than reactive. So you'll see an increase in probably the arrest rate and traffic citation rate, things like that.
Okay, moving on to fire, page 11. So the paid staff is Sandy and then Ryan Welby. And then there's stipends for the officers fire department. Do you want to just talk about, Sandy, your repairs and maintenance at $37,000? Or it wasn't repairs and maintenance, sorry, machine and equipment.
Yes, that's. That includes 5 sets of firefighter turnout gear. They have a shelf life of 10 years to meet an FPA standard. And when I started, they were all more than 10 years old. So for the past few years, well, since Ryan's been hired, I've kind of tasked him with getting all the turnout gear less than 10 years old. We still have several sets that are more than 5 years old. And then, of course, as we get to that limit, then the other ones are going to outdate. So we don't have a lot. We have a lot of turnout gear that's out of date. So we're just trying to get everything into date. Says legally we shouldn't. So it would just take one firefighter to be injured to have out of date personal protective equipment to be in a lot of hot water, so to speak. We've put in the budget to replace 5-inch hose, 2.5-inch hose, and 1 3/4 hose. We had that in the budget last year, and this year should finish that out. We pressure test it every year, and we've been kicking out several rolls of hose. They're 50 feet long, and you don't want that to fail, obviously, if you're in a fire. Rescue struts, there's $4,000 in the budget for that, and that's for vehicle stabilization. So if we have a vehicle accident that's on an unstable slope, they're just struts to help secure the vehicle so that we can work around it in a safe manner. And then EMS, personal protective equipment. We haven't bought any. We wear the EMS coat that gives you flash protection and bloodborne pathogen protection. And we haven't bought any since 2008, and I believe that was with a grant. And so most of those, the oldest that we have is 2003. Actually, we have some older stuff, but I've been trying to get rid of that. But the stuff in that fashion is 2003. So I put in for $10,000 to see what we could get with that, to try to get EMS protected clothing. So that's what that is for $37,400.
You can see that Sandy's budget went down a little bit from last year. Does anyone have any questions?
The fire at the hatchery made it seem apparent to me that we're going to need to expand our service area for fire response. When will we need to address that?
You want me to try to take this one on?
Sure.
Okay. Current philosophy is that the fire department will respond as long as they don't put their service area 1 at risk. Okay. So, for example, if there's no current incidents going on today here in town and something happens out the road, we'll send a truck and officers or firefighters out there. But the concept from the chief, as I understand it, is you don't do that unless you can guarantee that you still have coverage here in town. That's the philosophy. I guess it's been that way for quite some time, and I think it's something that bears looking at. This is an assembly level question.
Yes.
Okay. Meaning, what do you want the fire department to do? What do you want EMS to do? What do you want the police to do? I mean, we've got in some cases, so I'm broadening the conversation, I realize that, but it's an issue. I mean, Kelly's asked to respond. I mean, I think we did an accident scene EMS on 3 Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a deal with the Forest Service. I can tell you it does not pay for the cost of our response, but it's something. So today, we do respond in some instances. The question is, how big a response do you want? How do you want to pay for it? And, what's the right way to attack it? Is it, a service area issue, or should it be covered under the 4 mil rate that's currently being provided? I mean, it becomes a pretty big conversation at the assembly level.
Well, it's a real conversation.
It needs to happen, in my opinion. But I mean, this is not a shot at the firemen at all.
No, it's not intended to. I just wondered.
I was not happy. We couldn't have done a better job with the hatchery. That it has nothing to do with anybody doing a bad job. It's just that hasn't been the focus.
Well, it's my understanding they've put some kind of hydrant out there that you can hook a hose to.
I think we're talking about it. I don't know that that's happened yet.
I don't think it's happened.
I mean, I did a quick Sandy and I did a quick debriefing just with the 2 of us and to talk about what are the things we could do better. But, a site plan of the hatchery or any facility out there that's big enough that we might have a big event. A water plan, if you have to go out there, how are you going to get water to fight a fire? What's the response level? I mean, does the assembly, does the community, does whoever want us to respond with the full force? I mean, take the hatchery. We sent 1 truck rather than both.
How far
does
do
the
the
assembly
fire
want us to
hydrants
send them
go?
both?
4.5 miles.
I was thinking 6, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, that becomes an equipment issue too. I mean, if you're going to start doing more responses out the road, then you're looking at, potentially different types of equipment, so that you could, what we used to call grass trucks when you get down south, self-contained tankers that are just basically a water supply.
We have one.
You know,
Oh,
yeah.
35
And that's the one at Scow Bay?
Mhm.
And what's to, perhaps, and I realize this is a borough discussion, but maybe it should be moved out closer to Papke's or halfway
It's-
to,
So part of the discussion when the borough so I guess past practice, when the city limits was at 1 mile or whatever,
Right.
Libby Straits, somebody told the fire department they couldn't respond past that. And the volunteers had a conniption fit. And because they want to go, that's what they want
right.
to do. City limits moved out to 8.5 mile or whatever it is, 8.76. Hydrants go to 4.5 mile. We have the water truck with the portable tank, so we can then break the truck free, and you have that water supply there. But you have to be able to draft it to
Right.
get the water, and then that takes time and
Right.
personnel. And so then the whole borough formation discussion came about, and we had talked about doing a substation out of Pappy's Landing, but what good does that do if you don't have personnel to operate it? So you still have to have people respond from Petersburg to respond, which takes time.
well, having a truck out there, it might encourage people who actually live there to respond to their own
Agreed.
fires.
So in the past, the ambulance typically will respond. We bill the people because we bill them whether they're in or
Right.
out, a flat fee. Fire will go, search and rescue will go with no fee, but we can't deplete the community of
Right.
protection because they're the tax base.
Well, it's sounding
So
more
they
and more
wanna
like
go.
a service area issue. In
Safe.
Fairbanks,
is.
they have
It is,
fire
yeah.
service areas.
And
so-
we want to go. It's just a matter of if we sent all of our resources to the hatchery and there was a house fire in
Right.
town, now we're in trouble.
And I appreciate
Yeah.
that, it's something that needs
Right.
to be, and I also can appreciate that it's a borough issue.
Yeah.
and
This
not
is a
for this-
really, really big conversation. I mean, and
Yeah.
Well
probably,
said.
Yeah.
because it goes into, I mean, you know, and I'm trying not to make this contentious because
Right.
it could get that way
Sure.
in a hurry. Reality is, this is a decision the assembly has to just kind of get the right people in the room, which would be the fire chief and Sandy and you know, and talk through what do you want, and then the experts can tell you, well, if you want this, this is what it's going to cost, and this is it either in equipment, is it in facilities, whatever that is, and we have not done that yet.
It's on my
It
list.
believes,
We
I
probably-
believe it needs to be.
And we probably had 15 people or more sitting at the station, and then it was like, oh, we're sending one truck, that's 5 people, and everybody else was like, do we get to go, do we get to go? And I went, oh, you guys probably should go home, because if there's a fire in here, in town, we'll page you out. But they are we gonna get to
Right.
go, are we gonna get to go? Sorry.
For those of you who heard me talk, and, you know, we passed right by it on Kelly's budget, so I'm gonna come back to it, which is, you know, the radio issue. What's not in his budget is 83,000, isn't it? What?
Yeah, it's not in.
I mean, that's an adjustment to his budget we're gonna put in, because we have an $83,000 expense to fix the radios. I mean,
Which is not just Kelly, it
I know,
affects
I
the
mean,
fire department as well.
it applies both
Yeah.
departments, but we have a radio problem. And when I talked to the radio consultant about this, is, you know, I don't want a solution that just goes to the end of service area 1. I mean, at some point, either whether it's this assembly or a future assembly, I'm sure is gonna weigh in on this issue. We really need, because right now it's already happening, we're being asked to respond out the road for whatever reason, whether it's on Three Lakes because of a Forest Service contract or whether it's a fire at the hatchery. We gotta keep our people safe, and that means they've gotta be in radio contact. So at least on the road system, we've gotta fix the radio situation. Same thing goes for the equipment issue with firemen and how they go about doing business and what the assembly wants us to do. I think it would be very short-sighted if we don't deal with this issue soon. And, you know, in the case of Kelly's radios, which, you know, I think we need to put that in and pay for it. Again, it's both police and fire, so that we have the right equipment to keep these volunteers, in some cases, or staff and the others, safe if they're having to respond to something. And it's, you're gonna have some people say, form a service area and tax you more, and you're gonna have some people say, no, it's already covered, and that's a conversation that the staff is not, we're not really in this fight. It's kind of a community-wide conversation, I guess.
And I guess when we get to that point, we have to think of realistic expectations as well, because when you have to respond 20 miles, you know, maybe we won't be able to save whatever's on fire, but we could save an adjacent structure or something to that effect.
Yeah,
So,
it's a complicated, I mean,
Yeah,
it's what I
right.
said,
I mean,
you gotta have the right
right.
people in the room
Right.
and have a pretty detailed conversation. I mean, and you know, you can do service fees. I mean, I've seen that in rural areas where if the fire department, EMS, police respond, there's a fee for that. You know, so rather than a tax-based issue, there's a charge for a fire truck rolling. I used to work for Brinks, and there are a lot of down south fire departments, paid firemen that charge, it's like $3,000 if the truck rolls and it's a false alarm. So you're a homeowner and your alarm system goes off and you get like 3 strikes. The third time it happens, you get a bill for $3,000 because the cops roll that truck to your house. There's lots of ways to cut this, but it's complicated.
Does anyone have any more questions for Sandy?
If we're at the end of Sandy's, I'm gonna call a 5-minute break.
Call Cindy.
Thank you. Sorry for me going on.
No, that's okay.
It's a really big issue.
Donnie, I need the key for the storage unit.
Oh, I haven't been out there. I was going to go out there after this meeting.
If you go, will you pick up the canisters for the fireworks?
Absolutely.
Because I started to go this morning and it was like, oh, don't have.
I don't have the key. Yes, most definitely.
Did I say anything wrong, Sandy, when
Nope.
I went on my rant? Okay, good.
Yeah, I think charging people a fee would work, but the whole subscription thing would be hard. Because I think
Well, I brought it up because there's so many different ways to look at it. The community has to weigh in and decide what everybody wants.
Did you
It's just,
see my beautiful drawing?
there's just too many
That
different.
is quite the drawing.
What do you want to do?
yeah.
And
But it
there's
has
a-
everything there
you know,
that needs
there's
to be.
the assembly
And
is,
what's that, 20 foot?
as a body, is going to have to weigh in because I've heard from
Jesse
Nancy
Ruth.
what her opinion is. I'm sure
I
these
know.
two guys have a different opinion.
Right.
I don't know what John's opinion. You know what I mean? It's-
Jesse just wants to make sure that
There
we
is.
the box
That's a
down.
conversation.
But he also wants to make sure
Yeah.
why does someone put a piece of tar pipe in it and not have to cut it?
So Jody, as a result of me poking last week about the ambulance billing survey, they created a new survey for Southeast. And so Friday
Fair
it came
enough.
out, and so I replied. But yeah, I'll have an answer next week probably. But yeah, I told Jody I keep everything, and it came in handy because a year ago I asked for information, and I forwarded that email to the lady again, and I said, how come nobody will ever respond to me when I ask these questions? And then all of a sudden it was, oh crap, and here's a survey. How about that? Instead of reinventing the
Fun.
wheel every time.
Fun.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah.
at what point do you want me to bring up the
And then,
community?
So you end up with this really oddball mix that, in a sense, our taxpayers have to help offset the fact that the state has chosen not to tax the unorganized borough for school purposes. And these are the kind of arguments that AML makes. If you talk to the state, they're going to give you a different side of that story. Which is why Ketchikan is suing the state of Alaska.
Back to Nancy's question, the personal property is anything, we're not talking about household possessions, that's how you're talking about.
I don't believe so.
Other types of things. I know some states have everything.
Yeah, cars, campers,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, okay.
RVs, I guess,
Right.
but again, we don't argue with them on their value. They've severely undervalued the harbor.
Undervalued or overvalued?
Undervalued. The amount that they set is the personal property tax for Petersburg is, let's just say it's really, really low compared to what reality is.
So Public Works on
I was
page
gonna say,
13.
Carl's itching to get started here.
Yeah, you sure am.
He loves budget.
Itching was the word he was going to use.
Streets fund. No, Carl is right. Can you want to talk about he pays for street lights? Pays power and light for those. I don't know in case you didn't know that. I think a lot of people don't know that he actually, they just think that power and light absorbs the cost, but no.
No, they do not.
Comes out of my budget, as well as any of the public use garbage cans downtown. Also get paid for out of the public works budget.
And there's paving for Harbor Way and Joy. Is that just a portion of the paving for that?
It is. The rest, the total paving estimate is about 86,000. So 70,000 is going to come out of the separate streets fund that is funded through the Secure Rural Schools Act. We didn't have enough in that fund to do the entire project. This is Harbor Way and Joa Street out to Maine. And there wasn't enough money in the paving fund to do that, so just supplementing that with 16,000 in this budget.
And then do you want to talk about the Fram Street design?
Yes, I'm sure everybody knows the Fram Street from Main Street up to First is kind of a shambles. It's on the north side of it, the retaining wall adjacent to Hammer and Weekon's parking lot was designed as a retaining wall. On the south side, the retaining wall, quote unquote retaining wall, is not a retaining wall. It's an old foundation wall of the building that used to stand there. And it's starting to bow in. Probably has been slowly bowing for many years.
In or out?
In towards the property.
Mm.
Yeah. The pressure of the soil on the outside is starting to push it in. So we really need to do something with that. Obviously, the sidewalk on that south side is horrible. Power and Light wants to eventually move their electrical underground in that area. There's a vault that's protruding about 4 inches out of the sidewalk. There's a power pole in the middle of the sidewalk, and a junction box in the middle of the sidewalk. And of course, the sidewalk has completely failed in that area. So to be able to remedy all this in that particular trouble spot, we need to build a new retaining wall on our property within the right-of-way. The current wall is actually on private property. The Litzheims own that lot. And so this money is not to do the project, actually. It's to do some surveying, to get some engineering done so that we can know how much it will cost to proceed with the project. And, Joe Nelson and I will be coordinating on this because as part of this, there will be some electrical design that'll happen. We need to design the retaining wall. We need to design the street improvements as well. And I imagine that this will probably affect that entire block. Looking at the other side of the street, up in front of the Moose Club, there are probably some changes that could be made, or definitely some improvements made to the curb cuts on that side. You get up to a certain point on the south side, up to the Treem property, and there is no sidewalk at all. There's a curb. So we may be able to put a sidewalk in there. It's going to narrow the street somewhat. It's kind of an odd shaped street as it is. So anyway, we'll look at all this in the design and try and straighten that out and just make it a little bit better. for pedestrians and visitors. So that's,
So this is survey and design money, or just survey money?
yes, survey and design. That's what that's all about.
Just want to point out, and Carl talked about paving, this is the only paving project we've got in the budget. And it's a money issue, is what it amounts to. I mean, it's expensive, so we wanted to do Harbor Way and Joa, because with all the North Harbor construction and the activity down there, it's tearing the road up. So we've done a lot of utility cuts to get power to the harbor, that kind of stuff. So this will allow us to fix all of that and get it done and over with. I know the mayor's not here, so I'm going to speak for him. He was hoping that we added, and I'm going to say resources, not necessarily people, but maybe other things, to do more paving, more maintenance. We were not able to make that happen. So that is an issue.
Carl does have a list, a wish list. that
It's
he would like to
just
do.
it's exceptionally
It is
expensive
long.
to
He gave me a
do
list of about 7.
street work. Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to bring it up in Mark's absence, but
Sure.
The reality is, unless we make major changes to other parts of the budget, or which could be done in some ways, becomes an assembly level priority thing. You want more street work done, so we put less money into a capital project contingency fund. That's one of the big decisions.
Carl, is there any way you can get PIA with their $1 million a year to do that rather than what they're doing out on the Front Street and that?
Well, they're still doing that. I'm glad you asked, because that was another part of the conversation. They are planning on redoing the sidewalks on Harbor Way. It's another reason that we're going to repave this. That area down in the North Harbor will look really good, after we pave it and PIA comes in and replaces sidewalks. And all that work that PIA does is on their dime with the money that they receive from the federal government. So it's a really good deal for us.
Any way to get them to get on Fram Street, into their, because I know they're doing the long range plan now.
It's a possibility, but I know that I spoke with the engineer that they have running the roads program before on designing that,
Understood.
and they shied away from it because it was a little bit bigger project than they were prepared to do. So,
Any way
it's
we
a
can call
possibility,
that a
but-
sidewalk?
What's that?
I said, any way we can call that a sidewalk?
So, the tribe has a 20-year plan that they're pushing forward. A lot of good things for the community, a lot of benefit to the Public Works Department and the streets, particularly, and also trails with Parks and Rec as well. So, they've got a really good plan, or a long list of projects that they're going to attempt to do with the funding that they have. Paving is something that they have done in the past. I think you were actually responsible for some of the paving they did, but they generally like to do things that they can employ their people with
Exactly.
now. So they can't do that with paving. It's pretty specialized, and they don't have the equipment or the expertise to do that. So,
Yeah, just amazing the Fram sidewalks and that.
yeah, it's potential they could actually do part of the work,
Right.
but we'll have to see.
Okay, thank you.
Carl, just a question on the Frame Street design, if I may. You got 45 for design. Have you done any spitballing, just raw numbers about the project as a whole?
Well, actually, that number came out of a spitball number on thinking that it would be about $500,000 to do that block and so we're looking at roughly 10% to get it designed.
Including retaining wall and all? The whole
Yeah.
kit and caboodle, power and light, everything?
Yeah, and the beauty of Power and Light being involved is the work that they will do, they will fund. So
Yep.
not all of this project is going to come out of the general fund.
That pole in the middle of that sidewalk, is that your responsibility?
No, it's Power and Lights.
Because
it's
that's
the borough's
the second
responsibility.
pole after this one that was curvy, the S one up here that they did. That pole, you can see it going down the stairs here. It's tough.
Yeah, they really want to change that up in
That
the worst way.
utilities right there, we need to fix it someday, soon. And Fram Street's been on the Assembly's capital project list for Well, I've been here 3 years. It's been on there every one of those.
It's always there, but
Okay.
it's just never, it's not a high enough priority to get consideration at the top of our list, or definitely not the state's.
Any other questions for Carl? Okay, moving on to community development on page 15. So this is Leo's budget. He paid him and Susan Christensen as part-time mapping AutoCAD person.
And half of an administrative assistant too.
Oh, right. And then, there isn't anything out of the ordinary here. Does anyone have any questions on this one page? The next page is also his. It's facilities maintenance, on page 17. There's 4 people on the maintenance staff. If you go down towards the bottom, there's a list of projects. There's $20,000 for public works, which is to fix the siding and insulate office part of the building and finish the parking garage. Then there's $14,200 for the Clausen Museum, for fire alarm and storage building, replace carpet, replace damaged track lighting. And then the $17,000 for Parks and Rec. It says HVAC controls, it's paint gym, gutters at ball field, surveillance system at ball field. And then we took out the $70,000 for the building repairs at the school. And usually, the facilities maintenance crew budgets for different projects at the school. This year we took it out so you can look at all of the projects that the borough and the school and everyone wants to fund all together. And then we're also going to talk about the HVAC controls too, because they're actually going to be about $75,000. It's not going to be part of that $17,000.
The HVAC controls, is that for the whole building? Or for
That's specifically for the community gymnasium, so the activity room, racquetball courts, the gymnasium. It also connects to the school-wide boiler system as well.
I was going to say, the boiler system was on the capital project list, but not very high, and I wondered if it was the same thing or something separate.
It's not.
About,
They're
with the schools.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know completely what the school is doing, but it's a little bit different. So the way that the utilities work at the at Parks and Recreation, our community center, is a little bit mudded. So for the aquatic center itself, the school district pays for the 2 boilers, and so those boilers, of course, do all the water in the pools, showers, those types of things. Parks and Recreation covers the costs for lighting, for the in-floor heating, for the HVAC system, all of that stuff, computers, that type of thing.
Who pays for the water and wastewater of the pool?
Starting this year, Parks and Recreation will cover that as well. And so, and this is kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but you'll see in my budget that my utilities have gone up, and that's part of the reason, is those 2 things. But then in the community gymnasium, that side of the community center, it's the utilities are covered by the school district. But my staff covers maintenance of those, management of those, the whole works. The hot water comes from the boilers over at the school district to the community gym, but then we have like a superheater that then heats it up a little bit more to send it through for the in-ceiling heaters, the in-floor heating, the HVAC system. All of that is then managed off of those. But the project itself, because of the way that the community gym is set up, it's on a pneumatic control system, and which was put in late 80s, very early 90s. So we're looking at 30 years, and right now we're at that point where it has a lot of holes in the system, which means that the system itself overheats and then tries to correct itself, but it can't. And so the facility tends to be really hot all the time, and we can't minutely finish it. The school district is doing their big project at the elementary school, and part of that project is a company coming in to set up their HVAC system with a DDC, like a digital control system. It's the same control system that we have in the aquatic center. It's the same control system that the high school has. The only building in that area that will not have it come at the end of their project will be the community gymnasium. And so they are working up a cost for us, which we're saying is about $75,000. That while they're in town, already doing the elementary school, that they would do the community gym at the exact same time, providing us savings. So they don't have to ship additional products.
Providing who savings?
Providing the school district savings, but it'll provide me savings in the long run because the maintenance staff doesn't have to fine tune it, and we don't have to work as hard to make sure that.
But which is why we're also talking about spending Superior Schools money on.
Instead of coming out of the general budget.
Yeah.
But it's a bigger issue than the other thing that'll save me money on is if we do that project, we will also combine the servers from the aquatic center, because the aquatic center has its own server, the school district has its own server, and then also the elementary school would have its own server. So in an effort to combine all three of those, we would have one server managing the whole system, which then in the future, if there's an upgrade cost, that type of thing, we'd be able to split it in half and be able to do it instead of $14,000 out of my pocket and $14,000 out of the school's pocket. Instead, it would be half that. So there's lots of benefits here. Unfortunately, the school district gets the largest chunk of it.
So back to the facilities maintenance issue. That's why we took it out of this budget, is because we think this ought to be tied to the Secure Rural Schools funding, because the school district's going to get the biggest benefit out of this, and we're still recommending that when we get to that point, the assembly approve it, but it's just not in this budget.
And Leo didn't put into his budget $50,000 to repair the sinking concrete floor in the Public Works Department office. That's kind of on his wish list.
Yeah, the whole building's sinking.
Yeah.
I would like to comment, if I could, that we up professional services, and that's because we've coordinated all the sprinkler, fire alarm inspections for a while there. These guys would call like Public Works and say, hey, you're due, so fly me in, and then a month later call somebody else. So we coordinate all those, and we coordinate with the schools and the hospital and just get them all done at the same time. And we have 2 new buildings, so that's why that went up a bit.
This is tough. We're still, internally we keep debating, how much of this should we staff to do? How much of it should we outsource? It's a union issue. It's a cost issue, and we're still working through that. And as these buildings age, Public Works building, Power and Light building, City Hall, the Harbor Shack. Police is included in this building. The maintenance costs go up, and you get to this point where you're spending a fortune trying to maintain stuff, and because we're not keeping up today. There's no question.
So facility maintenance, when individuals get called out and maintenance stuff, they bill enterprise funds because they're looking at the general fund, but they don't bill general fund departments for doing work. Like if they came to the municipal building, they wouldn't bill anyone, it's part of their budget. But they do something out in Mountain View Manor, they bill Mountain View Manor for their time.
Thanks, Joe.
Is that okay?
That's much better.
Any other questions for facilities maintenance?
Just one other, the question on the sinking floor, is that a short-term fix, or is that?
That's just kind
in
of
view of the landslide that happened a couple days
Yeah.
ago in Washington, it makes me wonder, are we at some risk there?
Well, we had our whole parking lot sloughed off under those
that's what I'm
conditions,
thinking.
too.
Yes.
How
there's
much
a
of
risk.
that is comparable to the floor sinking downstairs with being caused by Hammer Slough washing away the bank?
It's probably similar. I think we had real poor fill put in over the years when Public Works would
Some sheet
repair a
piling
street.
might be
They'd
in
take
order.
the old fill and pile it up. And I do know that when the parking lot sloughed off, I was asked to move my car out of the garage so it wouldn't be hurt. But I can still work in my office, so.
We're worried about the car, though.
But that's just a number. I thought, well, we fixed the floor in the fire hall.
You're not included
internally.
in the motor pool.
Yeah.
But has any assessment of that risk been made?
We have, I'll let Carl answer that, but reality is, we have some very old buildings in places, and, I mean, it's one of the reasons, we went into this budget, the hope was to try to start a general fund, capital project fund, so that we can start
But my concern
accumulating
there
money
is
for this.
it a site risk or is it a building risk? And I'm not sure
I think
which one it is.
We feel the perimeter of the building's fine, much like this building, and the floors have settled. So
Okay.
we did replace the floor in the fire hall. We kind of made some repairs on the admin offices with concrete foam that they can put to raise the floor up. But our building's still sinking, but I think the perimeter's holding up.
Well, we dredged the harbors to make room for more silt for Hammerslew to wash down from.
When, after, or during the landslide in the parking lot up there, we did have a geotechnical engineer
Okay.
look at that slope below the building, and their assessment at the time was, it's gonna stay. It's a very steep slope. They gave us some suggestions for controlling the water,
Okay.
storm water, which we've done. All the water coming off the roof is now guttered and downspouts to the bottom of the hill down to the slough. So the risks of the slope giving way are much less than they
Okay.
were. And the engineer did say it was fairly stable anyway.
Okay.
At the time of the land.
That's good to hear.
So I think Leo said it well. It's poor fill. They did a perimeter, of piling, to hold it up, and that's great, or it's working, but everything else is kind of
Yeah.
going south. So
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving on to page 19, we're almost done, guys. Community services. So we put in the budget what was requested by these different organizations. So the Costa Museum is requesting again $42,000. The transit room tax outlays, that's actually, that $12,000, that's gonna go towards the roof of the chamber for this next year, so. And then the other $32,000 is going to the chamber for operations. So the combination of those two is actually, what we're bringing in transit room tax revenue each year. Petersburg Mental Health, $50,000, Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services, $35,000, KFSK, $8,000. Mountain View Food Service actually went down $12,000. Because Mountain View Manor is full, they have seen an increase in revenues. And also, I think the cook-up there is cooking more things from scratch and thus saving money. So yeah, they were pretty excited to request less than last year. So I wanted to point that out. And the school is asking for $1.8 million again.
This is the Assembly's budget. This is kind of your version of a operating/capital project budget. You kind of have to tell us what you want to fund and not fund.
Well, there are a couple things, we've already discussed this before. The alcohol and drug and mental health services, we've discussed this when Smart John was here, and we realized that that was inappropriate. It had to either be an RFP or charge for specific services. Just giving this grant didn't make sense, either one of these. I feel if a department wants to have drug counseling or whatever, they can put it in their budget and put down a specific charge, $50 an hour, $100 an hour, whatever. But right with just these two outlays, we have nothing to, one, it's not in an RFP format, and we don't have anything to verify what we're getting for the cost.
Well, if I may, just so we're clear,
Go ahead.
These are not, taking those two items, these are not services provided to borough staff, although they do a tremendous job helping Kelly's group out. This is services provided to the community. So,
And in some cases to the school.
Correct. I mean, you know, they don't share a client list with us. I mean, and HIPAA comes into play pretty quickly here. These are services that are provided. That's why I said this is an assembly type thing. This is primarily services given to the community, not to borough staff or, I mean, although Kelly can speak to what they do and how they help the police department. But this is more of a community service,
Right.
not a department expense.
I guess I have two problems with it. One is that we have a hospital that's under our control, essentially, that we have to
That's
fund
dependent on
projects.
whose
That we
interpretation.
have to fund projects for. And yet we're giving money here without, I don't see any accountability, my first point. And I'd like to see, not make a decision on this, till I see everything else that's laid out, that both the hospital and everybody else has. The second point I want to make is last night I got a hold of the budget for mental health here in town. And it's pretty good. They've done a very good job, of getting funds, of doing so forth. And my question, I guess I was looking at is if we were to hold back or not fund part of it, would they go broke or no? And no, I don't think so. And if we have needs, I think we need an RFP. If Kelly has needs and so forth, I think it needs to be contracted.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
I come at this from two different perspectives. One as a mental health provider, and I was a part of those earlier discussions about the RFP. And an RFP in that context for emergency services, completely inappropriate by mandate from state funding. Done. It just is. We have technically two agencies in town, a community mental health agency and a private practice. In full disclosure, I'm a part of that. The mandate of a community mental health agency is for emergency services by and large, and you don't bid for that. That's just, they're given money for that. Done. Makes sense? It's done, and that it just is. To echo some of the things, though, and on this, like the money, I read the letter from Susan requesting for services, very clear and well written and accurate. What it doesn't go for, though, is if I'm reading that letter right, and feel free to correct me, is that isn't budgeted for, that isn't school money. That is more or less for the people who don't fit into that narrow window of Medicaid, schizophrenic, etc. To echo what you guys are saying, though, about, I've heard you too, in terms of the accountability as far as how is the money being spent. I know when we were discussing an RFP, that was something, as a business person, I had a problem with, as far as being the accountability of, if it had been an RFP and say I had gotten that or we had gotten that, from a small business owner, we're accountable for everything. It's money. And to not see an accountability where that money is being spent, I do have a problem with, and just from an accounting point of view, because it is a lot of money. As opposed to just giving someone money for, go hire a staff, and that's more or less what the money is for, to hire another staff. From a dollars and cents point of view, it causes me a little bit of heartache for sure. But about the RFP thing, that part wouldn't apply.
I guess two things. One is, what does accountability mean to you? What would they need to provide? They do provide us reports and they do provide us some financial information periodically. And are we going to hold them to a different standard than we do Clausen Museum or KFSK or anybody else that we have funded in the past?
Well, and in terms of financials, they provide us with their annual audit of their financial statements where it shows City of Petersburg revenue $75,000, $85,000, but you can't pull out the expenses that they allocated it to.
Yeah, the a la carte costs out of that 85.
But I'm saying we don't do that for anybody else.
Correct. We don't even do that for the school.
Yeah. The thing is, going on accountability again, this is just a giveaway. We need to have something, whether the police want to put it in their budget or school or both, saying that they will pay $35 or $50 or whatever an hour for alcohol counseling or mental health counseling, and then contract it through mental health or private practice or whatever. That's the fair way to go, and that's the accountable way to go. Just saying, here's $85,000. That doesn't make any sense. And you mentioned KFSK. We know that we have someone here at least twice, 3 times a month for a number of hours, and we know what we're getting.
And I would say the same thing for some of these other entities.
Right.
If you're going to ask for financial accounting, you need to ask it from everybody. And I take a little offense that you're characterizing money to mental health services as a giveaway. I think Kelly could verify that they provide a valuable service to this community.
Oh, I'm not saying they don't, but it's not accountable. And if, you know, if like, say, Kelly or the school or someone want or refer someone for services, that they contract with them to do that on a specific fee schedule.
Where
And
we're,
it would be fair.
where we're seeing them is, it seems like, and just based on my experience, we have a higher proportionate number of people that need mental health services or evaluations here than in other communities I've worked at. So when we have somebody that we've taken into protective custody, they're very responsive to come down and help evaluate that person and get them to the next level of care, whether that be taking them to the hospital for evaluation there or arranging flights out to Bartlett Regional or even up into Anchorage and API. And, you know, we've got, I could get you an exact number or a pretty accurate number, but they are in our office quite a bit with a handful of specific people that we're having to deal with to keep the public safe and, you know, get them the next level of care that they need to stabilize out.
The other thing that needs to be shared is that your services have recommended clients, to Petersburg Mental Health and vice versa. They work together.
One of the big challenges that, you know, Kelly's group faces, and Kelly said it really well, and I know this sounds slightly derogatory, but which is there's no law against being mentally unstable.
Right.
Right.
Yet the community wants, protection is too strong of a word, but the community wants the borough to respond.
Relief. The community
They
wants
want relief. So when we have folks who need help, they're pestering him to death. They're pestering Glow in the Harbor or other department heads that are facing this. And the community is saying, we want this solved now. Kelly's group's equipped to handle that only at a certain level.
And they're not mental health services.
Correct.
It's the
They
police.
can't treat. All they can do is confine within the bounds of the law. And somebody walking up and down Main Street yelling at everybody that passes them, you know, they're not necessarily breaking the law. So Kelly his guys can only do so much. His guys and girls can only do so much. Petersburg Mental Health fills that little hole in the sense that it allows us to take a sworn officer and kind of hand off and say, they now talk to this person. So Kelly's officers can go back and doing what they're paid to do. It doesn't take very many of these folks to be a huge drain on the city's resources. But as far as accounting for it, good luck. I mean, somebody have to think better this than I can.
Yeah, I'm hearing a couple of different things. One, in terms of the idea of collaboration, I wrote a letter to the borough about that. I think it's a discussion for outside of here about interagency collaboration. But in terms of what I'm hearing from you, just to make sure I'm hearing things right, and from you, talking about the emergency services, if I'm hearing you right, John, those are already covered by state funding.
Exactly.
The idea of, and rightly so, that is, you need those people coming down to help you out.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reality of it, that is the mandate of that. But just to clarify, I'm hearing you right, John, and this is the way I've read it when I've looked it up through my unfortunately extensive research in this, is that you don't want to pay for what they're already getting paid to do. Am I hearing you right, John?
Right.
And meaning like they're already getting paid for those emergency services, and that this 50 to 85 doesn't apply to that. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Exactly, and if we do want services, you know, beyond what the state's paying for, then we should contract that, and that contract should be an open contract.
And more or less just, it is a tricky piece, the idea of, and in full disclosure, also a person who's worked for mental health, it's a very, very needed in terms all of it with it. It is hard though when that 50 for mental health services, if it does fall into emergency services, that isn't something we're paying, should be paying for twice. Or at least, and I don't think it is being paid for twice with this, but that's what I'm hearing from you, that it can have that feel. If that makes
Yeah,
any
I
sense at
don't,
all.
I mean, today, I mean, when somebody needs this service and Kelly's group is called into it, I mean, we're not billing for that. I mean, we're paying for Kelly's time, his officer's time. I mean, I can't speak for, there's nobody that we're sending a bill for that to today. Yeah, I mean, if there's some state agency out there that we could say we just spent 4 hours helping somebody with mental health issues that we could bill for, that'd be great. But I don't think there is.
Maybe I'm
Now,
saying
mental
this wrong.
health may very well have grants that they're applying for, and I mean, and I'm way out of my element here, folks. I mean, if you want to have this conversation, you might want to bring in Kim and Susan Olmer.
And I was going to say, I'm going to show your dirty laundry.
I mean,
When we
because-
had this
yeah.
conversation before, my concern was that Steve nor anyone else on our staff has the expertise to put together and evaluate a contract for
No
mental
question.
health
I would
services.
agree.
Steve went to Petersburg Mental Health Services to provide the information that was presented to the Assembly to make the case against Petersburg Mental Health Services. We do not have the expertise to put together that kind of contract, nor to oversee it. And if we did contract those services, potentially we lose jobs and expertise we already have in our community and continuity of care just to have a contract. I don't see the sense in it.
Well, the thing is, it should be business. And if someone offers a service, you give them an invoice. And you give them an invoice at a standard rate. That just makes sense. to
Not
me.
all of those clients pay or can.
No, but if the school or Kelly or another department in the city calls for a service, mental health goes, or Jay or Reach or Community Connections provides it, then they invoice for that. That's just, it's just standard business.
I'm going to say we're going to agree to disagree at this point. I don't want to hold the discussion up.
Yeah.
Obviously, I feel very passionate about it as well. All right, continue.
Okay, next page. Library, I already did that. Parks and Rec. Budget. Your salaries were down, Donnie.
Yes, ma'am.
What's that?
Couple different things that happened with the salaries. Number one, Judy retired, and she worked a portion of July, and so plus also she had a lot of PTO that was to be sold out, about $16,000 worth. So that had to be budgeted as well. So that's a fairly good reason. Also, when we planned our budget for this coming year, or this year that we're in right now, we assumed that the person that we were going to be hiring in Hannah's position could possibly have a family. And if they had a family, we'd have to pay for insurance for that position. So we estimated that assumption with that in mind. And so now we know kind of where we're at. It has helped to drop that budget.
And I see your utilities, you already talked about that. You took over.
Well, just to recap on the utilities, you see his utilities going up from 75 to 98. This is due to an audit that the school and Donnie and many of us were involved in to try to figure out who the heck paid for what. And interestingly enough, I mean, and by the way, this started because of the pool cover. We made a pitch to the Assembly a couple of years back. Let's buy this pool cover and it's going to save us electricity. Well, it didn't. At least on the surface, it didn't. And we couldn't figure out why. So one of the things we undertook was, let's remap what meter goes where and who pays for what. What we found out is the pool cover was really effective. It saved the school a lot of money.
$14,000 to $16,000 a year.
Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, I'm glad it's saving somebody. But in this process, we discovered was like wastewater hadn't been billed for a long period of time. So this is a much more accurate number. Helps the wastewater budget out a little bit, hurts our general fund a little bit. But
Right.
apologize, but this is the joys of occasionally having to go investigate some old hookups and such, so see a pretty big jump.
Yeah, but because of that, we had to make some adjustments throughout the rest of the budget to make sure that we were less than last year, which was our goal.
Anyone have any questions for Donnie? Okay, last page.
Actually, I did have one.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just not a money question, but just, I saw the part of the surveillance cameras at the ball field.
Mm-hmm.
Just, what prompted that?
We used to.
It's not an expensive thing, I'm sure. It doesn't look like. I'm just curious about why.
So there's a couple of different things. First of all, we used to have a surveillance system up there, but 2 summers ago, we had a group of people break into the Little League Snack Shack during Little League season, steal all of their drinks, candy, the whole works. But then we're smart enough to know that there was a security system in the very top of that. So then they broke into the upstairs, stole the old system's DVR, and ran away with it. One of the things that we run into, and this winter's been a perfect example, is a lot of damage up at that field, which causes a lot of costs to us. We had a truck decide that they wanted to drive through the fence. We also had a truck and ATVs decide that they really wanted to drive up onto the ice skating rink, which then, of course, made huge ruts into the berms, the sides that hold the water into the ice skating rink. Which you do that a couple of times and the berm is gone and we no longer can hold water. So there's, there's just for some reason something about that specific field that we have continual problems with.
Oh, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Well,
Yep.
and it should be some comfort to know that they were smart enough to steal the surveillance equipment because they were probably educated at the Petersburg Public School System. It's
I
working.
don't know. Anybody who'll steal candy from the Little League kids.
Yeah, that's pretty low.
Not high on my list.
No, not so much.
Vandalism is the short answer.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the short answer.
Yeah, sorry.
I had someone come up to my office the other day and say, Donnie, why is the ball field not your number one priority? When it comes to Parks and Recreation, there's all these kids that go through the facilities, and you need to be spending more time and more money on this. And I sat back and thought to myself, gosh, how much money have I spent on that facility alone? Steve asked us to do an experience just recently of, okay, if you were to cut services, where would you cut services and where would it be the biggest savings? And for my department, the ball field would be the biggest savings. I'd cut a full, part-time, a 6-month employee would be out because the only reason he's there is to take care of ball field stuff during the summer. The cost of maintenance of the fields, chalking of the fields, fence repairs. I mean, the list goes on. And so it is one of the few facilities that just takes up a lot of Parks and Recreation's time. And so we just want to try to be able to cut down on some of the damage a little bit.
Protect your investment.
That's right.
We would love
Absolutely.
the Little League Association in the school to take on that project, but in today's world, that's not, falls on us for the moment.
That surveillance equipment really has a lot of value from my angle too. I mean, we
Absolutely.
had this rash of commercial burglaries last August with Franklin and Estes, and that case was solved because of Donnie's surveillance equipment.
Really?
And that,
Yeah, I recall that.
yeah, and that was break-ins all throughout that eastern side of town and out the road a little ways. I mean, there were, I think, 7 or 8 different places burglarized by those 2 guys.
Trickle-down effects for the surveillance potentially.
I know and I realize no one likes it. I mean, we heard that about the Harbor cameras, and it's like, the offset is if we don't do the cameras, we're going to have more damage, or we're going to have to hire more police or more people to wander around looking for it. The cameras are just more effective. I mean, hate to be Big Brother, but
Well, they're a known deterrent.
it's we're open for better solutions if anybody ever has them, but for now.
So on the last
Thanks,
page,
No problem.
page 25, it's non-departmental. So these are expenditures that overlap a number of departments in the general fund, like human resources, the alcohol and drug testing, the training. That went up to $9,000 because we are bringing someone into town twice a year to train supervisors and department heads and maybe employees too on different things. The liability of property insurance for the all the general fund buildings and employees. utilities, records management. There's also Granicus, which is the recording system for the in the assembly chambers here. Then my accounting software, online utility billing, and so that's pretty much that. And then you'll see at the bottom we have the contingency of $90,000, and then the operating transfers out. So there's the $500,000 that we talked about going a fish tax going out to the harbor, and then there's a $50,000 helping subsidize the assisted living. Last year was $100,000, but they've been doing so well that we decided to lower it this year to 50. And then we have, it's kind of a plugged figure for the. This is what
Is left
we
over.
used to, left over in our budget, with keeping the mill rate the same as this year, except for the courthouse or something. We put in a property development fund to transfer out to the property development fund, so we don't have to perhaps bond in the future, and we can start doing these repairs on buildings and things that we need. We were thinking the HVAC system, and then the schools projects this year we are going to take from the Secure Schools funding. And then we do need the radio system. So at the time we made this budget, we didn't have the figures for the police department's radio system. So this property development fund number is going to, if the assembly is okay with it, decrease by $82,429 to pay for the radios.
And then it becomes also a slush fund in the sense, if the legislature does raise the PERS contribution 2%, that's about $56,000 hit to the general fund. That'll have to come out, and that's where we, I guess, take it from. I guess we call it that. But in a sense, this is back to the assembly. How do you want to spend this money? Put it in an account, change something in any of the budgets you've seen so far, do something totally different.
Yeah, you could increase this amount by cutting a few other things in other departments.
It's really-
It's up to you. This is what we put out there.
Jody and I were given the task by the assembly to have a balanced general fund budget and to try to start funding capital projects. That's what this does.
You said that, I think I heard you say that you estimated that fish tax was going to be significantly higher.
That's our belief. Now, what we're basing that on is last year was so incredibly huge, and then we went back to the last time we had a big year, which wasn't as big as last year, and looked at the numbers.
Yeah, we brought in $1 million.
So then there's a question then where we put the rest of that.
Right, well, for our policy we've been following, it would go to the harbor, but the assembly can do whatever they want.
Our current policy is, and it's, policy's not even an ordinance, that's just how we're doing things, is that $300,000 will stay in the general fund, everything above that will go to the harbor. That's the current way we're operating.
We've heard a lot, well, that's the harbor's money. Fish tax is the harbor's money, it should all go to the harbor. And so that's what we are listening to, that's what we're trying to do slowly.
I had a couple of questions. I was really hoping we'd be able to get this sort of savings into the property development fund higher, especially since we know the state's cutting back, and they're going to keep cutting back. So whatever we build or do, we're going to have to pay for ourselves, which, that's pretty normal. So I'd like to see this number higher. What we'd have to cut to get there, that's why I'm kind of being a pain on these other things. Because, I'd like to see this number around $1 million. If the state came up and said, at the end of this session, and as the governor said when he was here, what's Petersburg going to pay for this remodel? And, we'll have maybe $250,000. I mean, that's nothing for a $9 million project. And what if they say, we'll give you $3 million if you put up $1 million? Our only option is going to a bond. We have no real savings.
Well, we can take it out of the general fund.
Yeah, but then we're getting hurt on that area. So I'd like to say, the other thing I was wondering is the money that's going to be, the tax money that's coming from the borough that we're working, that the assessor's working on now, has that been figured into this?
Yes.
Okay, so you estimated what you
Estimated
think
4 mills for service, yeah, we estimated.
So about $250,000
I took what the total
coming in.
assessed value was when assessment notices went out, I actually decreased it a
Assuming-
little, assuming with appeals and everything, and then added 4 mils to it.
Yeah, so that was about $250,000 this coming, okay. So that's already in here. In the other, and I know, since I'm already a pain, the 1.8 for the schools, that's what we were giving the schools when we had 750 kids. Now they're down to 4.25, and we're giving them 1.8. And the state's already saying they're gonna put in at least $85 more per student. Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing that cut down back to 1.6. I don't know property tax wise if we're allowed to go that amount or not. I think we are, because we've done it before.
I'd have to calculate that in 4 mils, or it's
2.65.
not 4 mils, 2.65, yeah, we could.
So
do
we're
that.
within that leeway. I'd like to cut that down.
Kind of like on the mental health question earlier, I would suggest that you give the school an opportunity to be here
Yeah.
if you're considering.
Yeah.
Well,
and have
as soon
that.
as we say something like that, they're gonna be here. In fact, they're gonna, you already got that note, so I know NSA's in this room. So, that's, they'll be here for the meetings, and naturally, no one wants to cut in anything, but,
So I was hoping next week we could go over the rest of the enterprise funds,
Sure.
and that should cover it. And then, I don't know what the assembly wants to do, if you want to have a special session and then make recommendations of what your recommendations are for the budget, or do you want to just do that the first reading of the budget? Like, I'm not sure, based on our work sessions.
I'll take
that we
this
can
one if I
change
could.
anything.
We can. The challenge for us is knowing what to do to the budget that will have 4 votes to pass it. I mean, call it what it is. It takes 4 votes to
Right.
pass it. So it's a matter of us trying to understand what enough of you want done so that we actually make those steps. So where we're thinking about in running it by you guys is, we have another budget work session, but it's done in a special meeting format. That where the work session is the first part of it. We go through just like what we've done the other funds, and at the end of it is an opportunity for you guys to weigh in, and we'll leave it up to Kathy to figure out how to format it to actually have votes on these things so that we can finalize these budgets. The other way to do it is not worry about that, and then at the first meeting in May, you vote on the budget, and some of you are going to vote no, some of you are going to vote yes, and then we start going from there. Our concern is you're getting down to the wire.
Right.
I mean, and so John just threw out a number of, he'd like to see this number go up to $1 million. That's roughly $560,000 that we'd have to find, we have to cut in the general fund. That's a big deal. We're not going to do that, in an afternoon. So if the assembly as a body is going to want to make those kind of sweeping changes,
Tell us where to go.
we really are going to have we can't do that the first meeting in May.
Right.
That's going to have to be long before that so we can get people in here.
That makes sense.
None of this includes any money for the hospital. I want to bring that up. The hospital wants to weigh in on that. So, this number,
I think you just answered your question.
I know, but that is up to the assembly.
So when next week do you suggest we meet?
When would you guys want to meet? Wednesday at 9 is the BOE.
And so is Thursday at 9 if it needs, is what I have here. That's all I have next
What do you
week
have on
is
Thursday?
Wednesday and Thursday, BOE,
Oh,
9 o'clock, if necessary. So,
Well, and John leaves on Thursday.
Right.
About Tuesday. Today I don't work.
Yeah, and
Tuesday's good.
and Wednesday we have the
BOE.
yes, right.
In fact, Tuesday's really the only window I've got from a work
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah,
Tuesday.
Tuesday's
If
the-
everybody
9?
might be in attendance.
Well, Cindy, when would be a good time for you? Because I know she.
I would love to do it earlier or later in the day so
Either
that
8 or 3.
yeah, the truth is I've been working longer hours anyway.
So 8 or 9?
I could do 8 if other
Or
folks
maybe-
were agreeable to that.
8 is good. Well,
Tuesday?
Tuesday,
8 on Tuesday?
Let's rock it.
Yeah.
8 is Tuesday breakfast, ladies, fellas.
Is this a special session then?
It would need to be, Kathy, where we have a work session followed by some kind of agenda item that allows them, the
I'll
assembly
set
to
all
weigh
up.
in and
Okay.
approve
Okay.
budgets.
Excellent.
So, yeah, we'll do the water, wastewater, sanitation, motor pool.
It's the Carl meeting.
This
Yes,
is
the Carl meeting.
Carl time.
I want you to
So, for the press in the room, it's not a, really, we have to figure out a way to phrase it. It's not the first reading of the budget ordinance. I mean, I don't want to, you're giving us direction to change
So
things.
Tuesday, it's what time?
8 o'clock then.
8 a.m. And so I'll
I
try to
have an
have,
engagement at 8.
Okay. I think,
8:30?
I think my
How long is it?
calendar is
Well,
open.
I could be here at 8:15, it's just that I have to be there at 8 to let them know I won't be there.
do you mind if we started at 8? Thank you.
I do, but I think it works better elsewhere.
So what time would you like to meet?
I'm a night person. I'd be happy starting at 9 p.m.
No.
So just a point of clarification, for those of us in the general fund, would we come after you have the initial and then,
Yes.
so then we can weigh
You
in?
may not need to be here, but I would highly recommend it.
Right.
If they want
Work
to change
session
something
will start at 8 and then special session.
Is that okay?
Not-
following it, probably.
Okay.
And I will never schedule anything but the general
Are we all
fund
done?
at one time.